Unfornicated won't be bound, tearing myths from the ground.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. And of course, it says, well, shit, because I'm running behind. What else is new? Hey, just want to thank everybody for being here. For those who don't know, welcome to Unfornicated. This is a project designed to tackle the rampant misinformation and conspiracy theories that flood our social media feeds. We do this through the application of, here's a thought, critical thinking skills, real world experience, and common sense. So with that being said, let's just move over here to the camera so you all can see me while I look at you. Okay, so hopefully you guys can all hear me. Let me know if there's anything going on with the audio by all means. What are we doing tonight? Well, tonight's topic is a reply from Flat Earth about a presentation I gave on the Drunk Debunk show regarding the Battle of the Beams. Now, I personally have not seen it. I woke up, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday, and I had, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 12 messages, all with the link to this reply sent to me in DMs on X, Discord, even my personal phone, go figure. So I figured, let's do a watch party. I'm not going to hear it, excuse me, I'm not going to watch it. We're just going to look at it together. So I put together a nice little theater for us, rented it out. We can all pop up our feet without having to worry about any of the ushers. Please keep your hands above your lap, not in your lap, and make sure there's no shenanigans going on. Actually, what are we talking about? It's unfornicated. We talk about unfucking stupidity. Please enjoy the shenanigans. Have at it, by all means. So, for those who don't know, Battle of the Beams. That's tonight's topic. If you have spent any amount of time on social media, it is the supposed globe killer, the silver bullet to finally expose the globe lie once and for all, and the flat earth proof without refute. Allow me to introduce you to the Battle of the Beams. Now, for those who, again, for the presentation, it was almost 2 hours long. Mike and I got a little sidetracked a couple different times. I do apologize for that, but when you start throwing rum into the mix, things like that happen. It's just the way it is. So what are we going to do? So the hands check's going to be rough. I know Icy Spin, but you know what? Look, there's no rules here. Just the only rule is don't be an asshole. Only I can be the asshole. That's just the way it is. My channel, my rules, I get to be the asshole. So, without much further ado, let's all hit the bar, grab your popcorn, and let's kind of see what's going on in our Flat Earth little reply here. Now, I find it interesting that one, they include me as the drunk lads, which I find odd because it's Mike's show. I just happened to go on it. He gave me a platform, and I did my presentation. That's not to say I wasn't drinking, but it's the idea that I'm not a drunk lad. Now, why to use lads is a different story, but, I digress. Let's just, let's just get to this and let's not worry about this. So, if you guys would all grab your popcorn and continue on to the theater, and let's go ahead and watch and see what kind of things that we are talking about tonight. Let's see how they finally debunked or refuted my refute. You know what? This gets confusing. Well, fuck it. Let's just see what kind of stupidity comes on. I would like to pause for a moment because, again, I can be pedantic. But as we're looking at this wonderful thumbnail is, one, I just like to point out that the bottom two antennas you see down here, that's the small Kinecobine, not the large Kinecobine. So it's a different properties, different reach, different everything else, and wasn't actually used in the bombing of Derby, which is what they're claiming. Again, pedantic details, but details matter. And also, I have no idea what the fuck this is over here. These are modern day weapons, and what the man, whatever. Let's just see what happens here. I'm going to fast forward through some of their Darby. God damn it. Thank you for my UK people reminding me it's Darby. I'm going to fast forward through the Dayton Miller spiel that they go through, and let's see if we can just move it back. And actually, let's go do the playback speed. Let's boost it up a little bit and see how it goes and go from there. Okay, let's see. Let's fast through the Dayton Miller and the special thanks, and let's go.
With precision, could manipulate this elusive medium.
All right, hello and welcome everyone to Ether Cosmology Roundtable number 74. Today we're going to be doing an update to Battle of the Beams. After all these months, I think it's been about, 6 or 7 months now, there's finally been a thought-out presentation done to try and refute Battle of the Beams. So we're going to take a look at that and look at some of the key points that were put forward, primarily 2 arguments. So we'll cover those.
Was it just 2?
We'll just go ahead and get into it. All right, so I got that screen shared for everyone. And you guys said you could hear this for sure?
I cannot hear it. Did you play it?
Yeah, can you hear it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
I can hear it.
It's a little low.
Oh yeah, I was just testing it out. Okay, turn it up a little bit and go to 17 to when the Prezi starts. So quick notice, let me get these guys a link here. So if you guys are interested in watching this, the full Prezi, honestly, it wasn't that bad if you just kind of, take it for what it is. But he goes into some cool technical details, and stuff that I haven't gone into, and I actually learned some stuff throughout from the Prezi. So definitely check his out. It's pretty deep.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to take that as a compliment that Alan learned something from me. I wish he would learn how to say presentation instead of Prezi. There's 4 syllables. 4. Okay. You don't need Fleur street cred. You don't need to create words on your own. Let's just, come on. But hey, I'll take it as a positive. The full Prezi. Thanks, CK. Yeah, the full Prezi. Oh, God.
Decent. So anyway, we'll go through here now and lay out the argumentation. 50. All right, so here we're going to see the last updates to this was from Dave McKeegan, who did a follow-up on a Globebusters video that I had done. This was like early on in the Battle of the Beams, when we were putting forward the research that we had come across. And there were some mistakes made that were corrected by McKeegan, primarily the attack on Derby being cited as a successful bombing run at night. That wasn't the case, and so that's been since forth corrected, and a couple of other details from that. And so we're going to see this is supposed to be the
Let me just interject here. It was a year-long bombing run where they smoked the warehouse and they put it into smithereens, depending on what ones you talk to. They did this. They've had 4 or 5 different streams on this, and yeah, okay. So they corrected that it was only bombed 6 times. So I guess maybe there's some facts that they're looking in. Go figure.
addition to McKeegan, where he's going to break down the physical mechanisms or the mathematics that explain the refraction and diffraction amounts necessary and how it's going to preserve the beam geometry.
West Side Girl, welcome to Ether Cosmology Space Audits. His name is Alan. He's done quite a few of flat Earth debates, primarily on the flat Earth side. He also has personally debunked all of Einstein because he shat the bed, and has proven that general relativity and special relativity are shit. So there's your introduction.
In such a way that it allows a plane to fly line of sight over it to target. So here we go, lads and ladettes.
Of Newton. Well, this is my refined level. Like, this is my, for a great understanding about how these things work. This is just my wheelhouse. This is my, this is what I do. This is what I've done. This is kind of like, I can take it one step further. Besides just saying, oh, it's diffraction, I can show you how it diffracts and why it diffracts. So it's I don't put it in the same level, but let's talk about it. It's like general relativity is a refinement of Newton. Well, this is my refinement of McKeegan. Let's look at it that way.
All right, so we heard it here first, lads and ladettes. He's not just going to say the words diffraction and refraction. He's going to show us how it's done. That's cool. I'm super looking forward to that. And quick history on this guy. He was in the Navy. He specialized in signals and cryptography. He is currently an engineer, he says, and that's about all we get for credentials. As we go through the Prezi here, he will reference the credentials throughout, but that's just his qualifications and background on where he's coming from when he was talking about, this is my wheelhouse, etc. So this is from his area of expertise, as he says. So let's go ahead and continue it out from here. So that's the introduction to the gentleman here. He's making.
Okay, I want to pause right here real quick. And as far as my credentials go, look, 25 years in telecommunications. I can show you my DD-214. It shows all my military training and everything else. Again, it's just more conspiratorial things of, hey, well, here's his credentials, but we don't take it for what it's worth. But anyone else says their credentials over here, and as long as they're a flat earther, we agree with what it is. Back to the double standards. You got to love this. Hey, but at least he said I was in the Navy, and at least he got that part right, and he said I was in cryptography, which is got that right, and I was in signals intelligence. So, I mean, thanks, Alan. I appreciate you having that full part in. Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Specific claims on how his presentation is going to be different than McKeegan's. Continue here. All right, so this goes into the radio wave propagation type, the frequency specifically.
VHF and UHF frequencies. Now, when we talk about the radio band, the military specifically uses HF, UHF, and SHF and higher frequencies. The reason why we don't use a lot of VHF is A, that's where all the licenses are for the FCC, but B, it's also because it's a shoulder band. It can sometimes act like HF and be reflected off the ionosphere, which the UHF doesn't, and sometimes it acts like UHF, and that it's almost directly line of sight. So it depends kind of like where you, and the funny thing is, I mean, you're in IT, like I am, there are no absolutes when it comes to radio. Everything is like gray areas. It's more like a speed limit on the highway. You can go over it in rare occasions when you know there's no cops. So, you know, it's kind of insane mentality.
Nice. So let's kind of go back a little bit on that. The different types of radio waves that are used and how you were saying it's kind of a gray area. Well, the way that it's defined is, they have like specific quote unquote cutoff thresholds for what constitutes as very high versus ultra high, etc. Right. But sometimes those waves within certain thresholds behave like the lower classification or the upper classification, depending on different variables. So there's no like clear cut and dry, this is what it is, this is, or whatever, because when you get into the VHF or the 30 to 300 megahertz, some people will say that ends up being UHF based on certain characteristics on how it's being applied. So you get into this mixed match of like we don't really know, we have different classifications, but they all kind of behave differently under certain conditions. So that's kind of the guideline that they're going with there. Now VHF though specifically is line of sight. It doesn't diffract well. It doesn't refract well. It does refract, but not super good. And it's when it gets physically blocked, it's over. It doesn't diffract and come out and bounce over things very well as they would need it to do if the Earth was a globe when we get into the specific beam propagation for Battle of the Beams, because we're not dealing with an omnidirectional beam that can be just refracted and diffracted. We're dealing with specific beam geometry created by two overlapping lobes that create an equisignal that facilitates a specific geometry that a plane has to fly through. So that's not going to be able to be maintained if there's Earth curvature or things block.
Okay. God, I already got a headache from this. So there's a difference between omnidirectional and and a directional antenna, right? Omnidirectional is basically it's a J pole sitting up at the top of a mast, and it basically goes in all directions, 360 degrees, and everything else. A directional antenna is basically a antenna that is basically pointed with reflectors and things like that to generally point the beam in one general direction. Diffraction happens across the board, regardless of what signal type it is. Diffraction has various different types of diffraction. It's like knife edge. It's about other different obstacles and things like that. He's treating this like it's millimeter band frequencies, which is up in the higher gigahertz and things like that. VHF does diffract. It is shown to diffract. It is shown to refract. In fact, UHF and VHF signals have a radio horizon, which is what we have in this presentation to kind of demonstrate that they don't know what the fuck they're talking about on this. So does it diffract as much as, say, I don't know, medium wave and low wave? No, it doesn't, because those use ground wave propagation and can follow around the curvature of the Earth very easily. But VHF, the limits that he's talking about, the different bands that we have, they weren't actually instituted until like 1952, and they weren't globally accepted until 1956. So in this time frame that we're talking about in World War II, there was no VHF, HF, or whatever. There was shortwave. Everything was referred to in the wavelength. So 10 meter wavelength, 11 meter, 12 meter, 9 meter. It's the, it's the height or it's the wavelength that it's actually given as a measurement or a frequency number, but it's not given groups as in UHF, SHF, EHF, or whatever. Those things were not adopted until 1956. In fact, a lot of those things that were adopted by the ITU in 1956 was based on all this work that was done during World War II, because World War II saw a lot of innovation because people had to survive. You'd be surprised how quickly you can MacGyver shit and learn shit when you're being bombed or you're trying to bomb somebody else. It's just kind of the way it works.
Blocking it based on the frequency, and even still based on the elevation of the radar towers, they're not gonna, or the navigation beacon towers, they're not going to be able to overcome Earth curvature there. And we'll get into the specifics of how they try to represent how it overcomes Earth curvature versus what the actual.
Thank you,
argument is to
Westside. I
maintain the
appreciate
beam
that.
geometry
I worked hard on that presentation.
Well, did
I
he
hope it
specifically show
resonated.
that diffraction, or did he just say it super ooper with confidence or whatever?
super uber with confies.
Oh, all right.
Oh, we want to talk about people talking with stuff with confidence. He made a lot of claims there, by the way. Did he provide any proof on any of these claims? Because I'm not seeing anything that he's providing except it just doesn't refract, doesn't diffract, but he's not showing anything. But hey, let's not let a little thing like proof or claims or something like that get in the way. But don't worry, we'll address this a little later. And I'll get a little more technical details for those who want to be involved. If those want to go to sleep, by all means, get comfy on your pillow. When I start the technical talk, you can go right to sleep in no time. I promise.
All right, so let's skip to 20. on here.
Why are we skipping?
That was a really long-winded explanation where he just said the same thing, but mine's better, right? He was like, McKeegan says it diffracts, I say it diffracts, but I'm better. Moving on.
I mean, I don't want to spoil it, boys, but he certainly got me amped up to have a physical mechanism and some math behind it. See how that goes. All right, so let's listen to this.
So, but I watched it, so you don't have to. But watch you by Taboo Control 6 if you count.
What kind of a fallacy is that?
Found
Couch
this.
guys appeal to douchebaggery or what?
No, wait. This is extremely important here. Let me get his full thought out here, because he's going to preface that he's watched all of the prezzies on Battle of the Beam so that the audience doesn't have to, and he doesn't want to strawman anyone's position. So that's why he went through all this tenuous research to watch all of our content to make sure that it's accurately represented here. So this is him laying out the preface to that, which
This should be fun.
later.
The globe, right? It's been used everywhere on social media, at least on X, since August when they found this. There are no less than 4 videos, well, 6 if you count McKeegan's, on YouTube. And the first of it was actually by Taboo Conspiracy, published 3 years ago. Now, I've watched all these videos, some of them multiple times, because I don't want to be accused of being a straw man.
It's not
But I watched them, so you don't have to. But I know our community well. If you want to do your own research, they're not hard to find on YouTube. I'll just say that.
Awesome.
Couldn't even link us.
I mean,
Just link you, bro.
Unlucky.
Like, without even thinking about it. Whatever.
all right, so let's see here. So remember, guys, he's watched all this stuff so that we don't have to, so that it can be accurately represented here. Thank God, Globularist has taken it upon himself to accurately represent the positions of a contrary belief system. This could be the first time in history, lads. And so we're going to move on to the specific claims about how the navigation beacon system works.
Oh, are we going to skip over the radar slide? Please tell me we skip over the radar slide.
Man, imagine you could manually punch in a number for the timestamp skip. Oof, come on, you get it together. All right, here we go.
The Luftwaffe. They also say it's, Wikipedia says it's more or less line of sight. By the way, not just Wikipedia says that. Every radio manual says that. No. For Alan, it is direct line of sight.
Thank you, Alan.
We'll come back to that.
And this dude is having a great time, bro. Oh, that was so funny. The way that he
One of them
said,
drunk, or are they both drunk?
ooh, so here's the thing. I think this guy started before this guy, because this guy seems way less drunk, and this guy seems way turned up. All right, so let's do a quick recap here. The Lorenz system is a blind landing radar system, or navigation beacon. All right, my terminology is a little skewed there. It is a navigation beacon.
Words matter.
And what that means is it emits 2 signals from it. That two lobes of radiation, and they combine in the center where they overlap. They both create a coherent tone that when you're in a plane and you're in one of the lobes, you'll hear a different sound than when you're in the center. And you can know how to get to the center based on what tone you hear. So if you need to go more left or more right, whichever signal you hear on the left or right side of the center, you'll know to go more left or right to get to the center so you can hear the coherent tone. This is how you land a plane at night, or when the conditions are such that it's impossible to see, you don't have any visibility. Blind landing system. So you were in this radar system the entire time. You're being guided by a coherent beam that is constantly emitting a pulse that you're picking up because you're inside of that beam, and that is guiding you so that you know where you're going. You're not more or less in the Lorenz beam when you're landing a plane. You are in the Lorenz beam. It is line of sight. The way that they're phrasing it to present it like it's more or less line of sight, as if there's a possibility that it's not used in direct line of sight, because that's the way that they have to try and skew it to make it.
No, that's not how we try to skew it to make it work. VHF and UHF has what we call a radio horizon, which means it extends past the optical horizon. This is what's known as a radio horizon. We will go to a calculator and I'll show you the numbers that goes through it, because apparently one of the heads up that I got regarding this was that they strawman all my arguments and they turn around and say that I don't actually use the software that I say that I provided screenshots on. So they didn't watch me type in the things. So it may have been just something I created for shits and giggles, because I'm trying to prove a point as opposed to maybe demonstrate, I don't know, some expertise in a thing. And by the way, how many times has he already called it a radar? It's not a fucking radar. Jesus.
It seemed like that's a reasonable position that you could use. The only way this system will safely land you is if you're in it, not more or less in it. That's going to be the important distinction here, because you're not going to know when to drop your bomb unless you are in the equisignal. You're not going to hear.
But he said more or less. He said Wikipedia said more or less.
That is the word magic that is used specifically. All right, so let me see where the next Next portion is here. All right, so this guy, this thank you, Alan guy, thanking me for no reason, and back to beam minus. We can keep going here for a couple seconds. Actually, that was it. All right, yeah. So,
Because it's direct line of sight and because it hits the horizon, the bottom of the radio signal will be clipped. So therefore, the center of the beam, as it hits the horizon, is now the bottom of the beam. Is basically what they're inferring.
ooh, so after 6 prezzies, that is not the position. The entire beam would be blocked. So you can either take a tangent to the horizon if you say that you have vertically polarized beams that are, making it such that it's not being physically obstructed by Earth curvature when it comes across it. So if that's the case, then you got to preserve the beam geometry so that it can be flown through. You're going to have to take a tangent to the horizon. So that's
Yeah. It transmits from an antenna, goes over the horizon to the radio horizon where it makes a tangent to the curvature of the Earth, and then continues based off of that curve over the horizon. It continues on that line of sight. Now, here's the thing, though. This completely eliminates every other variable when it comes to radio. It eliminates antenna properties and signal properties and radio wave propagation. The 3 things that allow you to get from point A to point B. So yes, it is line of sight, more or less. Yes, it extends 30% past the optical horizon because there is a radio horizon that is known and proven by accuracy starting in 1932 and has been proven and used by every radio operator since. So we can go by that, and I can show you an online calculator. In fact, maybe I should do that now. But you know what? I'm taking notes. Let's keep going.
the distinction there for what's being put forward, not that the bottom half would get cut out and then it would still work or whatever you're trying to say.
So wait, so he's saying that the globe would block the entire signal. I'm not understanding that because when you look at their drawings, it doesn't. It shows a tangent. So this is where it gets confusing. And there was a post on one of my posts from Piezo who says that the curvature actually clips. Maybe I should go look that up so I can show that to you guys and things like that. But it was on one of my things that says the curvature would clip the bottom of the signal because as soon as it hits the optical horizon, that signal is now like dropped because it gets lost, I guess. And then because it blocks it, I guess is what he's referring to. And then the rest of the signal is now going outwards based on the optical horizon. But again, does not account for anything like a radio horizon or things like that that are actually, amounted to. God, we're 15 minutes in and I already fucking have a headache.
And he'll go back and reference clipping throughout this Prezi. Not clipping. It would be physically obstructed by what's called Earth curvature at a specific distance, which we'll come to later on in the Prezi.
So a quick question then, Alan, maybe you can help me explain this when you say that. I'm talking about clipping. I'm saying that the signal as it hits, from my understanding of your drawings and everything else, is as the signal hits the tangent to the optical horizon, the bottom half of the signal is now blocked or clipped, right? It's nowhere to be found. It gets lost. And now the center of the beam becomes the bottom of the beam as it goes out through the tangent. Does that make sense to everybody? I mean, to me, that's how I understand it when I looked at their drawings and everything else. So, if I'm wrong, by all means, tag me, tell me I'm wrong, and I'll be happy to backspace it and choose different words.
And let's see, we can actually play this out for a couple of minutes. I will put it on 1.25 speed. See if that's too fast. Let's
I see spin. I seriously contemplated that, but that's a special case, and that isn't tonight. But we'll come back to that in a second.
let me know.
I'll show that in a second.
Okay.
And the last one is that kinetic mine had pinpoint accuracy, resulting in untold damage. They, quote, smoked the Rolls-Royce plant, and, to rubble, basically.
Wow.
And we're going to address that. We'll address.
Yeah, addressing it after I've addressed it in 6 subsequent presentations seems a little weird to act like we haven't addressed it. But we're going to find that the entire argumentation is going to be hinged on the accuracy and the misspeak on this claim that I made and calling into question the measurements themselves. for the beam geometry that we have, irrespective of the fact that we have the literal technical specs for it delivered from the Telefunken company who made the system for the Germans, which wouldn't change our calculations by very. All right, so let's continue here.
Each and every one of these things on board. Okay. So now the next two slides are the crayon drawings created by the Ether Cross players as part of their proof. Not to worry, we'll revisit this again. We'll also, some of these have actually converted into text, so it's a little easier to follow because this way your eyes aren't jumping back and forth here. But the specific things I want to point out here is going to be that this is the horizon. Because of the horizon, you see that the signal just continues as a straight line. So I guess you think this is a string, or I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things that are kind of hard to understand as far as.
Well, specific beam geometry would have to be preserved. So if it gets clipped or hits Earth curvature, gets obstructed, then it can't end up on the other side of it. So this would be the only reasonable option to maintain the beam geometry, which is the important part of it.
So, again, it's a misunderstanding of radio wave propagation, radio wave signals, and everything else. This is not like a laser where you hold up a piece of paper to block half the laser. We're talking about it gets further along, and as the beam disperses, it grows out. And as it grows, it can go over the curvature, and it can. That's where we get the radio horizon, because it refracts down. And as it refracts down, that signal can still continue to grow and disperse as it goes out. When we're dealing with something like Voyager, there's a reason why those antennas, that even though as directional as they are, they're pointing to a general direction in space to where Earth is. And it's hitting basically Earth, the sun, and like half the solar system from how far away it is and how wide it gets. I mean, it's unreal. So the signal does disperse or diverge, and it keeps diverging as it goes over the horizon from the radio horizon, and it doesn't clip. It's not an obstruction. The ground wave propagation allows it to follow along there. And you know what? We're going to do a whole thing about ground wave propagation because it seems like it seems to be a big hang up on the sense of where they actually think this thing goes. Maybe I should have watched this first so I knew exactly where to go from, but let's continue on. Hopefully everyone is enjoying this and having less of a headache than I am. But hey, you know what? Oh, wait, Mike's here. Mike, hey, welcome, buddy. Hope you're feeling better. Do you mind opening the bar and playing waitress tonight? I'd greatly appreciate it.
And in addition to that, the crayon drawings, right? This is about the mathematical distinctions between playing that tangent out to preserve the geometry versus, where to put the beam at the altitude versus where the bombers have it.
That's what they believe and not believe. But
let's skip to the correction on the radar system versus navigation beam. This is an important distinction, and thank you for this correction.
Let me just kind of set the record straight here and kind of like maybe set the stage for their understanding of this topic. It is not a radar. It has nothing to do with radar. Radar implies that there is a reflected signal and a receiver that can say, hey, that's how far it is.
Okay.
Connected Bind had no receive capability, only was transmit only. Specifically. Now, this might be pedantic, but I'm just trying to set the stage and set your expectations for your understanding of this entire thing. I guess this would be kind of poison as well, if it weren't true.
I don't think that's poisoning the well. I think he just corrected the... Or was he? Never mind. Was he saying that based off of this, that the rest of the presentation would have no idea what I'm talking about?
Yes, exactly that. Yeah.
Okay,
that's
that
kind of
was
yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I was
You
referring to.
think it was radar? I mean, it was beams leading it there. If it was radar,
I mean, I was just using the word radar because it's just like familiar to me. But I know that it doesn't work in terms of like sending signal out and receiving back. It's one way only. So the proper terminology correction, it is pedantic or whatever, but it is important to name it properly.
that's pretty weak though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, when you're wrong about something or whatever.
And for those who are on Twitter, that was Brian Sweet, our local Nazi, coming in to provide his 2 cents worth because he failed middle school.
That actually, matters. Give it its proper credit. All right. See here, we'll go to 29, 20. Oh, we're already here. Nice.
But yeah, anyway. So the crux, this is where we start getting a little more funny. So the crux of their arguments and their calculations is based on RF measurements, as I said before. Now, what are these RF measurements? Well, in June 21st, despite skepticism from the entire war cabinet, that 28-year-old physicist, R.V. Jones, somehow convinced Churchill of the existence of kinetic bind. Churchill immediately ordered that all efforts be made to locate the beams and, if found, develop countermeasures. Simple. So, Jones had the idea of a prime target for the Luftwaffe, the Rolls-Royce manufacturing plant that we talked about, where it was the backbone of the air defense for Britain that Germany needed to basically squash so they could start a land invasion. Now, on a cloudy night of June 21st, an Avro Anson, which is this plane that you see right here, with an aircrew consisting of Flight Lieutenant Buffton and Corporal Mackey, took off from RAF Witten and flew north.
All right, real quick before we continue on with the authorization to get to the measurements, It sounded like he was a little unsure how, um, what did he say? How Jones, well, I have to go back and listen to that.
That Germany needed to basically squash so they could start a land invasion. Found, developed countermeasures.
Right. Here we go.
In June 21st, despite skepticism from the entire war cabinet, that 28-year-old physicist, R.V. Jones, somehow convinced Churchill of the existence of kinetic mine. Churchill. Okay, so I had a much longer presentation where I go into the intelligence part of this and the skepticism and what Jones actually had to do to convince Linderman and Churchill and all the different parts of it. We're talking about POW interviews, listening devices in the POW cells, Enigma decrypts, and also other human intelligence, signals intelligence that were combined. And he used, and then additionally, there was a paper from Eckersley that was unpublished at the time. It was based on a theoretical model of a 1.5 gigahertz signal, which is very high up. We're talking about UHF upper UHF bands that was be transmitted from the Harz Mountains in Germany, and theoretically, according to Eckersley, would be able to be received in the UK at around 20,000 feet. It was theoretical calculations based on a graph and stuff like that. It was given to him by a radio operator lieutenant. There was a lieutenant in his signal corps who was also an amateur radio operator who found the document to give to Jones, who used it to give to Linderman to convince Churchill. That other part of that presentation is almost an hour long, going over all the different hurdles and things like that Jones had to do as a 28-year-old physicist. And again, this is also a passion project of mine, because where you have Rochert at Station Hippo in Hawaii, or you have Jones here in the UK, these are people who you thought outside the box to convince mainstream or established war doctrine to be changed. Rochert used Navy band members that were stationed in Pearl Harbor because they weren't needed, because no one was playing the band. But he felt that their idea of timing and keeping time and stuff like that would allow them to identify patterns and help with the decrypting of what we called the purple cipher at the time, which is the Japanese naval cipher. So that was a very unique and different way of looking at it, and basically very anti-establishment of the entire Navy previously. Then you have Jones, who's doing the same, thing, who's using all these different, collecting all these different pieces of information as an aggregate. And while the intelligence, from my standpoint as being a former intelligence person, the intelligence was more or less a smoking gun. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That would have convinced anybody that I worked with previously. But he wanted to find more. He knew that Linderman wanted a scientific reason for this. So therefore, that's why he used this Eckersley document. Again, this is almost an hour-long presentation that I had, or at least 45 minutes I had previously, that I took out because I didn't want to bore Mike's audience anymore, and I didn't want to take up too much of Mike's time, because we were doing this during the week for some unknown reason. But hey, the rum was good, so it was pretty good. But let's go ahead and continue on here. He immediately ordered that all efforts be made to locate the beams and, if found, develop countermeasures.
All right, so after 6 presentations, the man should know exactly how R.V. Jones convinced Winston Churchill. It wasn't the arguments of geometric Earth curvature or with for or against it. It was the circumstantial evidence. Jones didn't just randomly decide, or didn't intuitively.
Not circumstantial. I guess you can call it circumstantial if you're going to put it in the court of law. But in an intelligence point of view, it was basically a smoking gun.
If we decide that Derby would be like the most primary target, obviously it's an important factory. It's going to be high priority. That's going to be the first assumption. How he actually determined it was there was an interception of the Enigma transmission, and when it was decoded, the only part of it that was decoded was 3 words. It was Knickebine, Cleve, and Stolberg, and each one of those had the corresponding latitude and longitude coordinates with it. So they knew exactly. Oh, and it had Derby on it. So it had the target where they were going to be intersected at, and then it had the 2 locations of the radar systems, the navigation system, beacon systems themselves. So
it actually said Northampton, not Derby, and it actually did not. It didn't have all the GPS coordinates for all the different sites. It was very limited. I'll probably do a video on the actual intelligence on it, because again, that's my background also, and it's something I find very interesting as a history buff. And it's one of those things of like I mentioned, the idea that young novel thinking can overturn decades-long war doctrine and convince, you're talking about people here in this war cabinet, earned their stripes, earned their medals, earned their battle scars in World War One, and they're applying the same lessons from World War One as they are to World War II, not realizing that 30 years, a lot has changed. And this 28-year-old basically comes in and starts telling a story and convinces everybody. And ironically, the person who was the most butthurt about the idea that somebody would have to use a radio navigation was the bomber squadron command, because they were, for all intents and purposes, they were the descendants of Nelson, descendants of Cook. They used celestial navigation. They were always on target. Any air crew worth its salt is going to be able to do things like this to get it on target. It wasn't until the Butt Report in 1946 where they found out that less than 10% of their bombs landed within 5 miles of the target. And when it became even inclement weather, it dropped down below 5% of their bombs landed within 5 miles of their intended target. So again, I kind of went over this and cut this out from the actual presentation just because it was not necessarily part of the debunk itself. And I figured it was just kind of like background information. Excuse me. And I didn't want to, lose an audience after 45 minutes of talking about intelligence and things like that.
So it's not that, he just went in there on a whim and was like, look, boys, it could be anything or something, right? This was very specific, and he actually enlisted the aid of a man named E.T. Eckersley, who was a famous radio wave propagation lab at the time, who gave him some supplemental calculations to...
No, he did not enlist T.L. Eckersley. T.L. Eckersley actually recanted his calculations that Jones used and actually refuted Jones's actual assumptions, for sake of other words. So he basically came in and basically took back his work and said, you can't use that. I don't agree with it anymore. But at the same time, obviously the beams were found, so it's not that big of a deal kind of mentality. But it's like one of those hurdles that was like a last chance effort. And actually in that meeting, they were going to cancel the night of the 21st flight, the last flight where they found the beams. They were going to cancel that flight, but Jones basically stood by his side, or stood his ground and said, hey, Churchill just this morning told me I could have this, so we are going to do it. So, good on him, because who knows how that could have changed things.
To add to his explanation onto how it would be possible for this radar system to work on a globe, because a couple of years, actually 2 years prior to Jones going through all this, the British intelligence had proposed that they would use the same exact Lorenz system, doing the same thing the Germans ended up doing, but they ended up not doing it because they determined that it wouldn't work due to Earth curvature based on their calculations. Now, it's said throughout the Prezi here that the reasons that the Germans had an upper hand with this radio wave frequency technology is because the British were familiar with it and the Germans were super invested in high frequency. But that's not the case. Because the countermeasures that end up being employed were all radio wave systems that they already had, and they just had to use the very high frequencies.
Wrong. Absolutely wrong. And maybe he's going to change this, because I assume he watched this ahead of time, but that is a flat out lie. There was absolutely a knowledge gap because Germany was invested in VHF and figuring how it worked, because they basically stopped exporting the Lorenz system in 1938, and they continued to use it from a military standpoint, refine it from a military standpoint. The British were focused on medium frequency and high frequency, much lower, that use skywave propagation and things like that, because that's what their radar was. That was home chain and things like that, was 22 megahertz and below. In fact, they did not have receivers they did not have military receivers in their airplanes who could locate the beams. They had to use off-the-shelf civilian receivers and modify them to be put in the planes. And we go into this on the measurements one, so maybe he'll correct himself. But additionally, the countermeasures they were using medical devices that were modified to basically go out and send the transmissions from the get-go. And it wasn't until almost a year later that they had developed their own transmitters and receivers to be put in their own planes and things like that, so they can actually do the countermeasures. But that first year, it was medical devices and civilian receivers that were modified for military use. And if you've ever tried to modify something for military use, it doesn't work like the military ones do. Just pure and simple.
from it, and they were able to jam the signals successfully and trick the pilots and make basically create pseudo echo signals that would lead the pilots astray. So this idea that Jones didn't, that this was all on a whim or something, it's very specific to how things played out. And also there was also even more circumstantial evidence that was found, but we don't even have to get into all that. But either way, the end result was these men were authorized to go take measurements of a potential beam that would be crossing the path at a specific point in the sky based on the latitude, longitude coordinates of the navigation beacon and the assumed target, derby, or sectat. Okay, so we'll get into the measurements now. Actually, I'll just let this play out for a couple minutes because it kind of goes through the whole history of it now.
Simple. So Jones had the idea of the prime target for the Luftwaffe, the Rolls-Royce manufacturing plant we talked about, where it was the backbone of the air defense for Britain that Germany needed to basically squash so they could start a land invasion. Now, on a cloudy night of June 21st, an Avro Anson, which is this plane that you see right here, with an aircrew consisting of Flight Lieutenant Upton and Corporal Mackey, took off from RAF Winton and flew north. Due to the secrecy, this is intelligence, by the way, they were given very little information. They were only told basically to locate transmissions with a Lorenz-style characteristics. And he gave them frequencies to locate. Now, as with most things in the intelligence world, luck basically plays just as much as a role as tenacity. And as luck would have it, the beams were located. So, I said we're going to revisit these claims over and over again. So, here's the flight planes, and in the House of Cards that it's based on. I'm going to highlight specific ones we're going to go over. So, here we're going to talk about the calculations at Spalding. So, to understand kind of kinetic mind and how it mattered, basically, is there was a critical knowledge gap of the radio spectrum between Britain and Germany leading up to World War II. Germany conducted significant research and experimentation with what we call VHF now, or what they call shortwave then. Britain instead concentrated research and development on lower frequencies like HF, or high frequency, which is the band below it. This is the range of ionospheric propagation, it bounces off the atmosphere, and it was also the same frequency range of their home-built radar system called Chain Home. Appleton, which is one of their leading scientists at the time, actually got a Nobel Prize for his work on the ionosphere. And it led to, obviously, untold advances between then and now. Now, because Britain's research was kind of mainly confined to lower frequencies, the RAF did not actually have access to radio receivers or transmitters in the frequencies that kinetic mind were in. So, to accomplish the goal and fulfill the order from Churchill to go locate these beams, Jones had to resort to purchasing civilian, U.S.-made Hallicrafter S-27 receivers from Webb's Radio in Soho and modifying them to throw into the Anson airframe. Now, we're talking about it's now gone from AC, now using the power supply for DC. And it's basically being strapped to a shelf at this point. And just to emphasize this point further, when it came down to the developing countermeasures, there was no transmitters either. There were no transmitters that they could basically buy off the shelf. They had to use modified medical devices that emitted high frequencies to treat pain and muscle conditions.
Really?
I mean, look, in wartime, the guy would be told, right? You do everything. So literally, they took these things that were used for, for managing pain and muscle conditions and said, hey, these are using the frequencies we need. Now we're just going to take the transmitter, we'll push them through this amplifier, and now, how it goes.
Yeah, make it work.
Hey, look, in wartime, look, there is no pretense of wartime except survival. So you do what works, basically, is what happens. If that's not evidence of a knowledge gap and by not having the hardware, what is? I'm not saying that they knew nothing about VHF or they knew nothing about UHF or things like that. I'm just saying they wasn't what they spent their resources on, and it wasn't what they were specialized in. They specialized in the HF frequency because that's what their home radar system was. So that Chain Home, which was the backbone of their air defense system, which started at 6 megahertz and eventually moved up to 22 megahertz, specifically because of the band, because of the wavelength that they were using. Because of that, that's where their specialty was. That's where they focused all their efforts. That's where they focused all their resources. And that isn't getting into the idea that radar was actually considered a lower priority by the Tizard Committee originally because Linderman was on it and was preferring more to work on infrared, acoustic spotlighting, and acoustic, acoustic something else. I forgot what it was. Basically, they were using acoustic mirrors to basically use sound to identify where the incoming bombers were and stuff like that. And then they would coordinate with the fighter squadrons to basically send them up to where they were coming in. The problem was the amount of time and the amount of accuracy that was involved in those were so small, and it wasn't until Linderman was actually replaced on the Tizard Committee with Appleton that radar became a higher priority, and therefore Linderman got sent off to go do what it, go play with his own little toys, and the radar system was actually developed in earnest and actually developed in time for World War II.
Well, that reminds me of the Gilligan's Island episode where Professor makes a shortwave radio out of a coconut.
Exactly. Coconuts for everything. Maybe they think that's what this is, 2 strings and a coconut, and that's how this works. I mean, that would make sense. I mean, it's just a really long wire that they're rolling out. So, CK, does that help a little bit better now? So when they located the beams, Lieutenant Buffton came back and he filed a flight report. And the report basically stated that the first beam was located near Spalding, actually and that's where the map is here that you see, and at an altitude of approximately 5,800 meters, and it was measured to be 400 or 500 yards wide. Then the second beam, because this is what's required for Nick is actually makes an X over the target. You have two different beams, and where they intersect now becomes the target area.
Mm-hmm.
So the second beacon was located with the same characteristics or similar characteristics, not the same because it was different frequency. Was located near Beeston, which was right about here, about around Nottingham. Now, Robin Hood was not part of this by any means, so we don't have to worry about that. So is it sounding still kind of reverby, or is it better a little bit now? Of course, now I got to wait 10 seconds because, YouTube wants to do things. That's better. Okay, great. Thanks, Icy Spin. So, but here's the question. Should we really call these measurements? I mean, to be honest, let's think about this. How was the signal measured? It was measured by some guy with with headphones on and a pilot who's guesstimating his ground speed on a cloudy night. What variables did they account for? What did they have a device that actually measured signal strength? None of that is known.
Okay.
So how much more equipment did they throw into this airframe that they didn't have access to make a measurement? But let's look at some of the variables that.
All right, so that's important. That's a pretty fair thing to say. They didn't know their ground speed with respect to how fast they were, with their airspeed. So the timing difference there, they're just kind of guesstimating. Now, with that said, their measurements correspond to actually they're a little bit less, but they're within the range of the technical specs of the beam divergence at those distances. So they were, if anything, they might have undershot, but the beam geometry, if you put it out to their maximum tech specs for the 0.3 degree beam divergence at that distance, then it's not gonna matter that much. Like, it's still gonna be useful. And the same problem that he just listed with not knowing your actual true ground speed is the same problem with why the system wasn't as super accurate and had pinpoint accuracy.
So let's talk about real quick what the geometry should have been at Spalding. Actually, I think I would discuss this actually in this thing. So let's just let it play out here, and we'll come back to that because, yeah, I mean it's rather large at Spalding to to how wide it was. I mean, it wasn't quite 1 square kilometer, but it was close to that. But it definitely wasn't 400 yards.
It relied heavily on pilot skill and timing because of that. That's why the X-Garage system, which was able to take the timing differential when the signal started, or when you first hear the first echo signal versus when you pass the next one, it'll tell you, how fast you're going to complete that, and then you will know when to drop your bomb before the target based off of a timer. So, a mechanical clock timer that handles all that. So it takes the error, adds more precision because the human error gets taken out of it. But the same situation in terms of why wasn't this accuracy perfect and all that? Well, pinpoint accuracy may have been an overstatement by me, but comparatively to the British, when you look at the Butt report, they smoked the British in terms of accuracy and ability to hit target. So let's not get carried away.
Okay. True. I'll say that according to the Butt report, we're talking about 10% within 5 miles. This device, this radio navigation, allowed Germany to be much more on target in the sense that they could at least get in the same neighborhood. But at Derby, we're talking about, you hear that, West Side? At Derby, we are talking about over, it's like 10 square kilometers of overlap based on a 0.3 degree divergence. So how are they going to hit a single building in that sense when at night with all the lights turned out because they're in blackout conditions and they're told to drop their bombs, and they drop their bombs based off of, airspeed and things like that? How are they going to hit a building in that large of an area? They're not. Because if you look at the geometry of what the beam would be at these distances, it would be way too large. So the fact that they're measuring this at 400 to 500 yards, and I went over this, that they're actually outside what the Luftwaffe considered the usable audible limit. So the fact that they heard anything in the static is pretty amazing, considering the ad hoc design. But also the idea that it was measured. It's measured by one guy, one time, with a set of headphones saying, "Hey, I hear it." The pilot makes note and goes on. So you can't base your measurements off of that and reverse engineer it. You have to go back to the source documents that the Luftwaffe had and say it's 0.3 degrees. In fact, one of the documents even says it would be as wide as 1 kilometer or more, or 1 to 1.5 kilometer wide at London. So, yeah, whatever.
Away here. But so this is the big contention here, right? This is, so far, This is what he hinges all of the argument on, is the measurements, right? The measurements were possibly different at this location.
That's not the whole argument, but I'm debunking your whole argument on this because that's how you base everything on your pinpoint accuracy and year-long bombing run. That's what I was disputing. Because if it wasn't a year-long bombing run and it wasn't 400 to 500 yards wide, then you kind of start unraveling your whole idea that this is a proof of anything, especially a flat Earth.
Could be different. Well, we have the Telefunken document that gives us the measured tech specs, even at a lower altitude and further distances. We know that the beam divergence doesn't exceed 3.3 degrees. So this is nothing. This is absolutely nothing.
It's absolutely nothing. It's just the crux of your entire environment of saying it was pinpoint and year round. But you just said, maybe I was misspoken when I said pinpoint accuracy, but it's nothing. I just also like to point out down here that these guys are telefunking comedians. Yeah, okay. You know what? That's a nice play on words. I'll give that I'll give that half a star.
There's not an actual contention here that's meaningful, because even if we
sifted through the slop and there's no actual argument in the tin, there's nothing actually left.
Dude, shout out to Galatrax, who really sifted through the slop to an insane degree, so that we didn't. Dude, he did the slop so we didn't have to, or whatever. But the reverse of what this guy did, like actually doing it to a T. So. This is what he's hinging it on. Maybe it was possibly different. Okay, well let's just say it was 2 tech spec that was delivered from the Telefunken company. Okay, doesn't change much. Still the same problem. So now we're gonna move on to some other points here. 35. $42, $34. Tap.
By the way, the idea that someone created a radio in their POW camp is also A, different frequencies, and B, you can buy kits from like starting in the 1940s. That's basically a copper coil and a nail. As long as you have an antenna to be able to hear, signaling and things like that, and you have a speaker output device and stuff like that. So that's nothing new, but it's not necessarily the same application as an antenna that's a football field wide standing on its side. Come on.
Wow. You're good.
Flawed. I mean, you could say asinine. You could say stupid as hell. I mean, I'm glad we're on the same. And would you base that on if you were to say
measurement or observation?
Hold up. Wait a minute. Why did we just jump over the idea that there's different variations in the airplanes and the airframes, and the different variations in the actual receivers, and that we're just glossing over the idea that they didn't have receivers or transmitters? What? Why would you go over that? Because that seems to be an important point, unless you're going to concede the point entirely. But you just said it didn't matter. So someone make this make sense for me, huh?
Observation. So here's the thing, lads and ladettes. The gentlemen were in an airplane with a radio receiver tuned to the specific frequency that was coming from the Yermans. And when they were flying in the signal horizontally, right, like, laterally across it, right, all of a sudden, they go from hearing nothing to hearing beep. And then when they don't hear...
Wrong. They started hearing dots. They went across it, heard a tone, noted it. When it went to dashes and the constant tone stopped, then they decided that's what the distance of it was. So it's not like you're flying around hearing nothing, all of a sudden you hear a tone. That's not how this system worked. You heard dashes, then you heard tone, or dots, then you heard tone, then you heard dashes, depending on which direction you were coming from over the beam.
Beep anymore. They just see how much time passed from when they first heard beep to when they stopped hearing beep. If that's not a measurement, like, I don't know what is. Now, if you want to...
Hey, Mike, first off, I want to comment on his pausing right there as you're taking a drink of the beer. Great timing on his part. Someone find me a definition of a measurement for me, please. Because to me, it sounds like Because again, he makes it sound like there's no static, there's nothing else, and that they're literally just flying in, and this loud beep, this loud tone comes into their headphones. They mark the pot, they time it, they calculate their speed, and say it's this wide. It's an analog signal. There's static in it. There's everything else. There's also ambient airframes. There's all these variables that he may or may not discuss here in the next few minutes about all these things that you need to go across if you want to consider this a measurement versus an observation. Because a measurement's also repeatable. Why didn't they repeat it anymore? Because they didn't need to, because it wasn't a measurement. They were just trying to find it. Once they found it, now it was about, it didn't matter how wide it was. Didn't matter how accurate it was. The fact that it reached there was the purpose of finding it. Now it's about developing countermeasures.
Argue the accuracy of it with respect to ground speed. For sure. I'm with you, dog. Great point of contention. That's 100%. However, right, we have the beam spec documents that show the divergence relative to the distances that it is away. And even if that was, giving them like more benefit of the doubt than they were actually capable of, the actual tech specs of it wouldn't affect it that much. So there's no argument here. Like this whole thing, and he goes into like all this room, all this noise. How could he even hear? I mean, dude, you're calling that he's trying to like, be making it about like the signal.
So when we talk about that graph and everything else, this is what I'm talking about here. And it's like, if you want to talk about 450 kilometers away, this beam is going to be roughly 3 kilometers wide. If this is the center point here, and it goes down to this line here, which is 1.5 kilometers, and it goes to this line here, which is 1.5 kilometers, that's 3 kilometers wide. Accuracy matters, right? But no, it's a nothing burger. Okay, sure. Let's go back.
Signal strength, did he hear it or not? Like, how can you determine when you're not hearing it, when you're just hearing noise? I mean, dude, irrespective of any of that, what was measured and what was plain trigged out of that completely works with the tech specs of the beam at its maximum divergence.
So how does a beam at 425 kilometers wide, distance, how does that on the document equate to the source documents of the Luftwaffe being 3 kilometers wide? How does 3 kilometers equate to 400 to 500 yards? That's a little more than just underestimating.
Divergence. So I think we can play this out to 45. All right, here we go.
Yeah, it could be measurements, or would they be accurate measurements? And would you base that on your globe-killing silver bulletproof?
Nope.
Okay, I'm glad we're on the same page.
Yeah, Bredimus in the chat says, appeal to beep fallacy. That's what's up.
So, this is...
He made his laugh have meaning.
So now we talk... All right, I'm going to quote Bob the Science Guy here. Fallacies don't mean shit. I'm not in the debate. I'm taking your math and your words, and I'm showing you that you do not understand this topic and that you are basically presenting false information. Fallacies don't mean shit. That doesn't matter. I don't fucking care. You know what? There's an appeal to authority in here too. You know what it is? Me, because I'm the fucking authority. I'm the one with the experience with this. I'm the one who's actually done it. I'm the one who's actually turned it up. I'm the one who's used it in a combat zone. I'm the one who's actually touched this stuff. So yes, you know what? You can take your appeal to bleep fallacy and include it as an authority and me, basically appealing to myself. Talked about how they, they're using these measurements as a basis of all the things and why that's, let's say, fundamentally flawed. I mean, you could say asinine, you could say stupid as hell. I mean, take your pick. Be creative.
I'll say, I'm not very creative, but I do have some. I was trying to think of something clever, but let me just go.
Actually, why don't we just not let you think of anything clever, and we'll just.
Dude, I was trying to be clever, and then I failed.
Yeah. Why don't we just get a mulligan on that and see where we're at here?
So, by the way, this is 25 various people of varying intelligence levels or whatever, who is helping Alan to debunk this. And meanwhile, I'm the sole engineer who decided to take this apart. So yeah, okay.
45, 49.
All these things kind of put it in text form, make it a little easy. I also looked at, listen to their videos, watch their videos, and kind of put things together to kind of come up with their claims as a whole.
Then still managed to not do it though, correct?
Yeah, because you guys got claims all over the place, and it doesn't actually, you aren't actually saying anything. Piezo has a thing that says eclipse. Then you say it's obstructed. Isn't that the same thing? If you want to start getting pedantic about everything else, you're saying it wouldn't work because the curvature would block the signal. So therefore, the center of the beam now becomes the bottom of the beam, and it would need to refract this amount of distance to reach the plane, according to your idea of how this works. That's not a straw man. That's me taking your drawing and extrapolating from it what you were actually saying. If you'd like to actually say it specifically and show it exactly what you think it does, and how it works, then by all means, go ahead. I'll be happy to go over it.
Exactly, huh? That sucks.
Now, I hate reading slides, but for all intents and purposes, I'm going to kind of go over this just because I want everyone to understand what it is. Now, what we have is we have the claims on the left, and we have my questions, or what I would say a reasonable amount of questions should be on the right. Mm-hmm. Now, so if we go back, remember they said optical line of sight is 31.36 miles. I use metric for whatever reason, but they don't want to do that. So they gave us a tower height of 200 meters because the benefit of the globe, right? Because we need a benefit. Reality needs the benefit to make this work. So the curvature.
Did you always give the benefit of the doubt to your boys, plus or minus? Right? Was I wrong to plus or minus the globe, lads?
Yeah, you only multiplied it by 2.5. How much of a benefit are you going to give us? Let's use reality here. You would clip the radio waves at the optical horizon, which means the center of the beam would now be the lower limit of the beam, and the airplane had to be in the beam to listen to it.
So again, not that it was to clip out just the bottom part, right? It would be, if it did somehow overcome Earth curvature in that way, it would be incoherent. It would bounce back. It would interfere with itself. There would be pseudo equisignals. It wouldn't be what it once was. You certainly wouldn't be able to adjust the beam geometry after that point. That's the significant part of this that isn't really being discussed.
So the coherentness and whether or not it reflects and whether or not it diverges from, going straight. So basically, and I've heard this before with some of their debates and stuff like that, that they're saying basically that the idea is that if there's any sort of reflection off the ionosphere or diffraction over the Earth, it's going to cause the signal to go left or right and therefore be unusable. Even if it moves by 1 degree at these distances, it would be unusable. Okay, so again, they're going back to the idea that it doesn't matter about the accuracy, but yet the accuracy is what depends on it, because now they're saying because of diffraction, it wouldn't be usable because that 1 degree would cause them to be off by 100 kilometers. And if they're off by 100 kilometers, then they wouldn't have hit the thing. They wouldn't have hit the target. They don't even know if they're hitting the target. I just said that they didn't hit the target. I've proven later in this thing things. They only went to Derby 6 times and only killed somebody once. They only hit the factory remotely during a day bombing. It's so counter things. It's like this part doesn't matter because it goes against what we said it was and what our calculations are. And it's a nothing burger. It's all slop. It doesn't matter. But yet, when we want to talk about diffraction, it's like, well, it has to be dead on. Otherwise, there's no way that we can account for it and it can't be usable. Okay, so which is it? You got to pick one or the other, bud. Because it's not like you can say that it matters. It's accurate. We have to have you can't say diffraction because it's going to move it and make it inaccurate. And then turn around when I say, well, it wasn't accurate. And you're like, well, you're right. It may not have been as accurate, but it was still accurate enough to be used.
And isn't being touched over because we were promised physical mechanisms, lads and ladettes. If we recall back to what was put forward at about 23 minutes ago, 25 minutes ago, SLAD promised us physical mechanisms and more than just math. Well, let's see where we're at here.
No, there is no physical mechanism. There's radio wave propagation. There's different things that occur to a signal that allows you to go there. It's not a physical mechanism. It's like they're saying words that they don't understand what it is. It's not like there's a funnel out there that the signal goes into and it shrinks the funnel into a waveguide and shoots it straight out and everything else. That's not how this works. There's nothing. Jesus. And also, now this is where things get really weird.
Okay.
I need you guys to think of this in a 3D model. So there's a horizontal width, right? There's a horizontal part of the beam and there's a vertical portion of the beam. So when we talk about diffraction, well, diffraction affects both of them. When the electrical field or the polarization of the signal is vertical, it's called vertical polarization. And then there's a horizontal polarization. Where the electrical field is polarized, kind of acts how things like diffraction and refraction work, and how the signal is basically diverges from the transmitter. And we'll get into this a little more, but I just want you guys to think of this in a 3D space. And we know how well blurs work in 3D spaces.
Not well.
No. So they assume Poison the well part of fallacy this, that again. it is a symmetrical signal, meaning that if it's 400 to 500 yards wide, that means it should be 400 to 500 yards tall. But then you go on social media and all of a sudden someone counteracts that, because that's what flirts do when they understand the subject, is now it's unlimited height, but it's still only this wide.
So
Wow.
the equisignal specifically is all that matters, that overlapping intersection point. How big the lobes are that create the equisignal at those distances is completely irrelevant.
So what matters is the width of the equisignal, but how big they are doesn't matter. So again, is it symmetrical or is it asymmetrical? Words matter. Are you saying it's symmetrical because in one of your drawings you say it needs to refract 7 times the curvature or the radius of the Earth to reach the plane, but then you say also right next to it that it wouldn't have, because it refracted so much, it wouldn't be used as a navigation beacon, because it would be just as wide, 7 miles wide. So it would diffract 7 miles, and it would have to be 7 miles wide, or whatever the drawing says. But like if they're saying if it has to diffract 30,000 feet down, and then they turn around and say, well, if it diffracts 30,000 feet down, then that means it would diffract 30,000 feet wide at the same time. So they're basically implying that it's in the drawing, they're implying that it's symmetrical. But we show that it's not symmetrical. This is what I mean by, like, it's hard to quantify their claims because it bounces all over the place. One claim counteracts the next claim and counteracts the next claim, and there is no homogeneous claim except to say it doesn't work on a globe with no proof. Here's the math. It shows it wouldn't do it because it's line of sight. And because it's direct line of sight, because that's what I want it to be, and not because it's it does refract, and because diffraction and radio wave propagation that occurs after that completely affects the signal as it continues away from the transmitter. Let's just ignore all that part of it and how that actually works, because the idea is that it reflects off something, so therefore it could go anywhere. Okay, yeah.
We've never made an argument that it's fixed at certain dimensions symmetrically or anything like that. This is about preserving the beam geometry.
So is the beam geometry symmetrical or asymmetrical? Answer that one first. Is it unlimited height upwards? Let's say, let me make this easier. Is it unlimited height upwards from the signal? Is it unlimited? It's limited only widthwise, not upwards. Is it the same width as it is high? Define exactly what you think the geometry is. Tell me at Darby what the width of the signal is, and the lower level and the upper level of the signal altitude would be, please. Tell me what the geometry is and provide your calculations for that. We'll address both of those, but it's like, can you guys pick one, please, so we can kind of go off this?
Mm-hmm. Can any of the radio signal experts understand how the system works, or no? Is that too much?
And then they specifically said, when they're talking about Derby and stuff like that, which is their target, is that based on the distance. I don't know if you guys can see this right here. It says, LOL. Oh, this is real Cygnus. Oh, this is one of the Globy buddies. Oh, wait, okay. Cygnus is starting crap in this thing. And oh, look, there's DP debunks in there too. God, you guys went representing, I guess. Thank you. Real Cygnus is in there saying, Knickerbein is one of Witzit's slam dunk globe killers too, with a laughing face. Wow. Thanks, Cygnus. I appreciate that. You know what? It's nice to see this community is out there representing us on a daily basis. This whole community, like regardless of who we are and where we are. I'm not on a lot of Discords. I'm mostly on like Twitter and things like that. So I'm glad to see you guys are out here causing good trouble and keeping up the good work. Hats off to you. I applaud you. You guys are my heroes. And based on their calculated, based on the RAF measurements of 400 to 500 yards wide, it would have a beam divergence of 0.066 degrees. Now, I'm surprised they didn't add another 6 just to be pedantic about it because, our favorite number.
Yep.
Hail Sagan. But they're saying this is the beam width. And they go on to say, well, even though that the Luftwaffe source document said it's only a 0.3 degrees, which is, significantly wider, that's the upper limit. So it could be down here. But yeah, their proof is those same measurements that we just took apart, like Lego.
He took the measurements apart by Legos.
Like
Right.
Legos.
By
Missed that
showing,
part.
dude, it's literally, so it would just be twice as big at that if it was
Okay. Here we go. Alan Math. How many? Okay, you know what? Let's continue on because I go into the math itself. It's a little more than twice, twice as big. Significantly more than twice as big.
if it was the maximum dimensions. So instead of being 500 yards, it would be 1,000.
The center of the beam would be 18,000 meters with a total of 12,000 meters above the maximum ceiling of the bomber. And it would require a refraction value of almost 0.8, or basically 5 times the radius of the Earth. Now, let's pause for a second. If it's 5 times the radius of the Earth, if it's not flat, and we're talking about that it's 5 times the radius of the Earth, let's say the Earth is just larger. Not that it is. I'm not a concaver or anything else like that. Don't get me wrong. But that doesn't imply flat, does it?
No, it implies there has to be something some curvature there.
So,
Shane, what do you think about that?
What?
What?
What? It
Dude,
doesn't imply flat. It implies curvature mathematically from what?
dude, so they're like, oh yeah, we could just 5x Earth radius. That doesn't mean it's flat. It makes it exponentially more flat relative to your location. You're having less curvature between you and the thing you're
You
observing.
didn't.
and our scale of the Earth now has it locally flat too. Watch a Jaren stream on Home Depots. It'll make it easier for you guys to understand.
Didn't our
This
boy
is-
John just do with like a to-scale model of curvature for the celestial theodolite and had to marvel to himself publicly thrice about how insignificant it looked at that level? That's why he had to blow it up 15 times. And they're saying that you can 5x it and it's no less negligible? Less negligible.
Wouldn't it? Yeah.
So the point of me actually saying that was just being a sarcastic git. Okay? I was being an asshole. That's what I was saying. I was basically saying that because there are some arguments that are out there, they're like, well, it would have to be a different value than what we've been told, so therefore flat. And I'm saying, well, if it's a different value than what you've been told and there's still curvature, then that means not flat because words matter. That's what I was doing. Not exactly the best way of doing it. Hey, look, I'm sarcastic. That's how I roll. That's my personality. That's exactly how I am. You guys have seen me in chat for how long? For Christ's sake, I do an impersonation. I'm all about sarcasm.
But anyway, it's always about the equisignal. Just try to remember that. That's the whole point of this, and the ability to adjust the equisignal, because the
I agree.
navigation beacon has a vertical dipole alignment that is able to be adjusted in such that it makes a U shape or a V shape, which will adjust the width of the, which will adjust how the lobes intersect with each other, which adjusts the beam width. So all of this has to be done line of sight. Otherwise, you lose the ability to adjust the equisignal after it becomes.
So that's a claim. Why? Explain to us why that it's optical line of sight, because you can't adjust the equisignal if it goes to a radio horizon that 4/3 are. That is measured for VHF, UHF, and is implied and practiced by every radio operator, including myself, including Bull Knight, including a bunch of other people, thousands of people who do this daily.
Diffracted, incoherent, or bounces, or anything like that, or gets obstructed, you lose that ability to adjust it.
So what evidence is there? So here's where questions go. What evidence is there that HF frequencies do not refract? It does.
No one's ever said that they don't refract. In fact, the Telefunken company, in which this guy's even referencing and goes over later, so I know he's read it, talks about how refraction conditions during the summer and winter don't vary that much, don't affect the system that much.
So wait, hold on. Now we have another problem here. You just said it's direct line of sight. I said it refracts. If it refracts, that means it's not direct line of sight. Am I missing something here? Somebody tell me in chat whether or not I'm missing something here, because I'm having a hard time trying to figure out which is which. Because you're basically making two separate claims. You're saying it's direct line of sight. I'm telling you it refracts, and you say, yes, it refracts. So therefore, it's not direct line of sight.
they had predicted that it would give significant variance, and it didn't matter at all.
Hold up. What? So what evidence is there? So here's where the questions go. What evidence is there that HF frequencies do not refract? It does.
No one's ever said that they don't refract. In fact, the Telefunken company, in which this guy's even referencing and goes over later, so I know he's read it, talks about how refraction conditions during the summer and winter don't vary that much, don't affect the system that much, because they had predicted that it would give significant variance, and it didn't matter at all.
Oh God, this is frustrating. That wasn't a Telefunken. That was actually the Luftwaffe in relation with Telefunken, and also with the various commands that were part of the measurements. It says that the range would vary. The overall range would vary based on atmospheric conditions, based on seasons, based on humidity, based on things like that. It has nothing to do with refraction per se, because refraction, yes, it will change based on humidity and things like that. But as a standard, as a way to simplify things, you use 4/3 R in your calculation. So you basically use a larger, 30% larger Earth to account for the refraction to the radial horizon, where it becomes tangent to the curvature. That's completely separate than the ranges and how they were affected by seasons and stuff like that. Jesus.
But no one's saying that it doesn't exist or have an impact on it.
What does the real world need the benefit of the doubt for measurements when we can actually use the real measurements?
Maybe he's getting drunk tonight too.
See,
That didn't sound.
this is where I'm confused. We have the actual measurements, but we also have the tech specs to make sure that the measurements at least correspond or don't exceed the tech specs, right, at that location. Because if they exceeded it, that'd be weird, right? But they're within it.
And what scientific evidence is? How is that confusing? When I'm talking about real world benefit of the doubt measurements, the ether guys said that they're giving the benefit of the doubt to the globe and saying 200 meters. I'm saying let's not use 200 meters. Let's use the actual measurements of the locations, which in this case is 84 meters, significantly less than 200 meters. Why is that important? Because of what we were able to discern from the source documentation from the Luftwaffe regarding what the signal actually did. So in light of having a multitude of information available to be able to re-engineer this, we have to infer things from the information that we do have. And it's not that big of a leap of faith to do it. The math behind it solves this. Is there a curvature clips the radio signal? There isn't.
There you go.
Indeed. The fact that it still works after all the Earth curvature that it would have overcome, it either didn't get clipped by Earth curvature or obstructed by Earth curvature.
Can you full screen that?
This is okay. So is the whole signal being obstructed? Is just part of the signal being obstructed or clipped? I mean, again, tell me the geometry as you see it of the signal. The height, the width, where it has a tangent to the Earth curvature, and where and what the geometry is at that point, and what the geometry is in Darby.
Can't read any of that slide.
Oh, yeah. Here's the thing: if I full screen it, it's not gonna.
Do you not have precise control over timestamps? I was thinking that.
No. This is a separate Linux issue.
Oh, okay. All right. I didn't know that was that gay. That's fine.
Sorry. Did you say something? There's a Linux issue.
Continue.
Has to do with screen sharing and full screen.
Alan, sorry, Alan. I feel for you because Linux is temperamental at best. So I can feel for you. I understand. You're trying to make it helpful for your audience, and I understand that it's one of those known pain points, and it's one of those points where people like you and I who deal with it just kind of try to laugh it off and try to move on. And in all honesty, I feel for you. I know what that's like because you're trying to make a presentation for your audience and being impacted by something like Windows crashing or Linux limitations and what it actually does. It's a giant pain in the ass. I get it. I'm sorry that Shane wasn't able to see the slide, but hopefully, he would go into the link and see it for himself.
All right, we'll continue on here. But Galatrax has the slide on his reference. All right, so I think we're about done with this section. It's all just hinging it on that argument, which it hasn't gone anywhere yet. And so far, we're nowhere closer to a physical mechanism. And then he calls into question about me good faithing the globe by making the calculations easier on myself just by adding like a uniform height to everything. Apparently we don't need to do that. And then he goes over 1 hour, 4 minutes. So here he circles back to my benefit of the doubting to inquire about some potential malicious behavior or something.
Dated 5 May 1940, and it's titled.
Also, what we're looking at here is a document that was recovered from a pilot that had some classified information about the Knickerbein system on him that he wasn't supposed to. And he's going to give a breakdown of what we're looking at here. And he's going to try and assert that I benefited of the doubt of the globe to give it elevation higher than where this gives more divergence or whatever, where it wouldn't work on a globe from this distance. It's like, but it already doesn't work back there. Like, let's anyway.
The navigation use of the long distance transmitters. Now, if you see the shape of the usable region, don't worry, we're going to come back to this. Okay, I just want you to just kind of familiarize yourself a little bit with this. So what we have here is this is the transmitter here. What we do is we have basically distance across the bottom, we have altitude across the top, and up here to use the same x-axis here for the distance, we have the beam width if you're looking from the top down of the signal. So say it was a light, you can see how wide it is. So at like 200 kilometers, we're looking at roughly 1 kilometer wide. And it says that the beam width is 0.3 degrees, and again, this is what they're taking into. Now this is secret. This was classified. It was not to be taken in the aircraft. So radar operators were known to take notes because reasons.
Yeah, because memory is shit. Yep.
Yeah, especially when you're in an airplane surrounded by a bunch of noise and you're trying to bomb somebody and you're getting shot at. Things happen. So let's zoom into the far left corner. Now, I took the same thing from the last slide. We have 84 meters, 35, 41. We also have the Ether cosplayers, their horizons. We have the Stolzberg Hill, which is another site that there are only 2 sites operational during this time that created this. There's a third site, but it was kind of pointing more towards Spain and Italy, and it wasn't really useful in this aspect. So I marked the heights here. Why wasn't that third location being able to be used if the world was flat? It wouldn't matter. But they weren't able to use it. Just random question. Here to kind of zoom in. So this would be the optical horizon for Stolberg. This would be the RF horizon of Stolberg. This is the optical horizon for Cleve. This is the RF horizon for Cleve. And according to their 200 meters benefit of the doubt measurement, this is the optical horizon, or this is the horizon that pertains to for their benefit of the doubts and everything else. Now, why would they use 200 meters? Oh, look, the line's starting to diverge.
Yeah, look at that.
Wait, let's give them 200 meters just because we're the benefit of our, the goodness of our hearts. They need it.
I love the clown.
Buddy.
He really doesn't like that part. That really hurt him personally. I
Dude.
can feel the butt radiating off him from that one.
Dude, so crazy. It's their like. That's it. Yeah. Anyway, that's this is what he's put forward for that.
The reason why I did this is as to show the lack of understanding. It could be nefarious. It could be a misunderstanding. It could be any number of things. Why choose 200 meters? Give me the actual reason why you chose 200 meters. When you already went to what's the height based on a GPS, you knew the height of all the different locations. You knew the height of the antenna. You knew everything else, but you decided to give everybody more than double what the thing was to go to 200 meters. To me, it looks like, looking at that graph, that you are doing it in such a way to show that it is diverging from there. If you have another reason, by all means, I'm happy to hear it. I'm inferring from this that you're using 200 meters because it's not just some random number. Stolzberg is significantly lower than Cleve. Cleve is only as high as 84 meters. Stolberg is 51 meters. Why are you using 200? Why not 100? Why not 85?
That this was a ruse to make it be where it diverges from. Okay. Literally incoherent.
Does anyone else think that this is coherent? I'm not butthurt about this. I'm just saying that if you're going to use measurements as a silver bullet proof to expose the NASA lie about the shape of the Earth, you should use real numbers. You should show things as they are. You are showing things as they aren't. Why? Why are you using 200 meters? Why didn't you use 100? Why didn't you use 150? Why didn't you use anything else? The only thing I have to go off of is because I know this graph was available. that you picked the one distance where it started to diverge from ground level. Just why? Why that distance? Tell me.
All right, so let's get into the second claim yet, because we haven't still don't have any mechanisms or math yet throughout this thing for how the diffraction or refraction, what values, what do I need to input, what gradient is necessary, anything like that. So let's take.
Hey, IC Spin, what channel was this on originally? You're talking about which one? There's Taboo Conspiracy did it about 3 or 4 years ago. Was the original one. Back in August of last year, Space Audits had it on their channel, and Shane had it on their channel back in, like, I think it was late August for Battle of the Beams. It was on Glowbusters also around August, September timeframe. And then McKeegan had a reply back in September, I believe. And then that's when I got involved in October. So in October, I started looking at it. And again, I have a full-time job, so I couldn't delve. And I'm also a single dad, so I have time is of a limit. So in accordance with Brandolini principle, I spent about 2 months on this. And I was probably done by the end of the year, but I didn't really have a platform to put it on yet. And I was debating how to present this on social media. And that's when I reached out to Mike over at our wonderful the Drunk Debunk show, and he gave me a platform and go from there. Okay, you found it. Great. Thank you.
Take a look at the next debunk of here. All right. So again, remember, this man has watched our prezzies 6 times plus, give or take, right? All the subsequent corrections on this exact thing. This is not where we're hinging our entire argument on. The system was used throughout the course of an entire year, pretty much every day.
You right there, used every day for the course of a year. Okay.
A success rate that was higher than the British, who were not using this system, who actually said, who were mocking the Germans for using the system until they got audited. And you could read the butt report, which is on the Battle of the Beams Wikipedia. You can go and check that out. They weren't even close. They had like they were. So here we go. We'll let this play out.
But basically the question is that if this had the amount of accuracy that the Flurf said it did, right?
Pinpoint.
It would be an easy target. This thing should have been rubble. But yet there's been no reported damage to this building outside that day bombing. And there's been no reported damage to the Derby rail yards outside of, ever.
Right.
And we're talking about several hundred acres. Okay. So
There we go.
here we go. So the advantage of doing your own research is looking for source documents. And again, like I said, that website that I used of that Dutch person who was a big fanboy of the S-27 receiver and did all this research, he literally found all this shit in microfiche at the German military archives. So it is on microfiche that you can actually get scans of and everything else. And I have the PDF versions of it. Let's go over some of these now. What do you think?
Let's do it.
So, but
This dude acts like he's never
I
seen
kinda
an
like the
800
stats.
PDF deep library before or something. So proud of his one PDF that he found or whatever.
God, Shane is such an asshole.
Dude.
Is giggling like a schoolgirl when he thinks he has a gotcha is like probably one of the most annoying things about being, battling Flat Earth and, whatever. All I'm saying is that the source documents are available. They're on microfiche because the originals were documented onto microfiche and then they were digitized. You can actually call the military or write, if we still do that, the military archives in Freiburg, and you can ask for digital copies. You can also find them online, yes. However, I try to go to the actual sources and not bank on somebody else doing my work.
Oh, sorry, my mic was muted. Yeah, dude, we went through all that and then extrapolated everything from it.
Oh, you did?
And now
Okay.
he's attempting to do the same. Cool that he's excited about it. All right, so that's really all that comes out of this is the accuracy on this, right? So the first attempt, now we talked about earlier he mentioned that what Churchill said, deploy countermeasures if you happen to find the beam signals. What were the countermeasures? Operation Starfish and Operation Aspirin. Aspirin was the jamming signals, so they were shooting out the same signals frequencies horizontally, just shooting them out, and then those would intersect with the German signals, and it would cause them to be led astray. And then the second part of that operation was Operation Starfish, which is where near the highest value targets they would set up a burn site, essentially, that when a bombing would start, they would ignite this burn pile, and it would be filled with a bunch of stuff that's going to be smoldering ruins and cinders, so that it can be seen from 20,000 feet at night up in the sky. And then the Germans would think that that's where the target is, and then they would drop their bombs on that smoldering ashes, thinking that that's where they were going to hit it. Because remember, they don't know their ground speed. They do have the signals, but they still have to get the timing right, and that's more of a skill issue when it comes down to the pilot. It's going to come down to the pilot, how accurate or not you're going to be on that. And then also, are you going to trust your timing and signal noise, or are you going to look down at that sweet red smoky fire down there, and you're going to go, oh, there it is. I'll just drop drop it when I get about to that location. That's going to be what aided in reducing the accuracy of the system in terms of that. And that was actually deployed on the Derby attack. By the time the Germans attacked Derby that first night, the British already had Operation Starfish countermeasures.
Starfish, yes. Aspirin,
So
no.
again, we're not hinging our entire argument on just that one attack, right? And that's what he makes the whole case out of. And then he goes on to say that.
So let's just recap here real quick, because I'm getting bored, and I'm going to fast forward because I know that he plays the MC Tune part as rage bait for his audience, and hey, I guess whatever it takes to get clicks. Personally, I don't give a shit about clicks. In fact, if there's nobody here, I'd still be doing this. But here's my thing about the accuracy. It's not whether or not, well, it's besides whether or not the actual target was hit. It's also how many times was it hit? You just said every day for a year. By my saying about the accuracy, I'm also implying that certain atmospheric conditions needed to be in place for those things to actually work, which means that it wasn't available every day of the year for the year of the bombing, not because of countermeasures, but because of curvature and because of atmospheric conditions that needed to be right for them to reach that far. There's a reason why out of 35,000 bombings, that London was bombed 15,000 times, because it was closer, it was easier. There's a reason why Derby was bombed 6 times, because certain atmospheric conditions needed to be in place for them to reach that far. It is not available all the time like it would be on a flat Earth. If the Earth was flat, why wasn't it bombed every day for that year? If that was such an important target, why wasn't it bombed? Simple question. I'm connecting the dots for you. If it's not about whether or not they hit the target, because that's part of it. It's how were they able to, why was it only targeted 6 times?
The calculations for explaining this propagation on a ball with diffraction and refraction are more than just math. It's an art form, in that when you get into it, it's actually a bunch of complex math that, is what he says. So it's not just math, but then he just goes, it is just complex math. And then he never even references said complex math throughout the rest of this Prezi, never gets into any specific details or mechanisms of how it would work. This presentation is no different than McKeegan's Battle of the Beams video, where he just goes, oh, diffraction. These guys are looking at this like an omnidirectional AM, FM radio wave.
No, I'm not. I'm looking at this as a directional wave. In fact, hold on. I have a question for you. I noticed that you skipped a couple of different slides that I had up when you jumped from this slide to this slide. And in here, we talk about things like radio refraction and why we use an Earth radius of 8,500 kilometers as variables. Why it was, found in Eckersley in 1936, why we used a 4/3 R, why it is not limited to optical line of sight, why the documentation for the range of nicobine is based on humidity and temperature of the air layers between the transmitter and receiver. Again, you skipped over this. Here's the other thing you skipped over. Here's the line of sight that goes through this. What is on the line of sight that goes through this? It's about salt water. It's about the conductivity of salt water and why the signal can reach that far. But you skipped over these two. This is what's required for the diffraction part of it and the radio wave propagation. But you skipped over these two because you think I'm only talking about where the horizon is and everything else. But there's other parts that you're missing here. So is there a reason why you skipped over these? I also noticed that you went to the source documents and you missed this. This talks about diffraction and propagation. It talks about that it's a grazing ray type of propagation where the wave graves the type of surface. You point it at the horizon, and the horizon allows that shallow angle, allows it to reflect off, and it follows the curvature. So when we talk about a geometric ray, A is a geometric horizon, B would be the optical horizon. Granted, this is not the scale. C is the horizon for radial horizon. And if you notice, the grazing ray goes all the way across, and then it starts diffracting from here. So why is this? And when we talk about the fact that a radio wave continues to grow and diverge, it goes through this, it's not being clipped. If this was being clipped, this signal would just go the same size right through here and goes across. But wave fronts that are angled using advanced, we're talking about advanced properties that we're doing, like wave tilting, things of, you're doing the engineering for, you want to do it over saltwater because of the salinity, because it's 5,000 times more conductive than average ground. And the reason why you do that is so you have a signal strength that's available to be used at the far end. Because it doesn't matter if the signal's getting there. If it's too weak, they can't use it. But you skipped these. Why did you skip these ones? Why did you not look at the one that says, hey, here's a grazing ray. This reflection is referred to as a secondary ray. Okay? The strong reflection bounces the radio wave off the ground. It follows the Earth curvature more closely than a national ray. And when you consider the scale of the Earth and the fact that radio wave's angle of incidence to the curvature, the horizontal deviation will be nominal. You skip this. You also skip this, where we talk about what the different versions of why there's a free space and why there's an overground. So instead, you went right to accuracy. You went, and you skipped what the measurements were at Darby. From Cleve, it would be 2.8 kilometers wide, and from Stolberg, it would be 3.7 kilometers wide, which make a target area of 10,000 or 10 kilometers squared, 10 square kilometers over Darby. So that's part of the accuracy, right? But again, how often can they can they hit it? Two, how often is that available? Because again, we go into atmospherics and things like that. It's amazing some of the different slides that they skipped over.
Thing that doesn't matter. This is not the case. This is two overlapping beams to create a specific geometry. Now, there was a really good point in here that was pointed out that I want to see if I can slide to before we get to the end.
Oh, a good point.
Here then. This is in regards to the vertical polarization and the propagation itself. So he gets into these two pictures here. The one that we primarily use is this one. This one right here is significant. And you see how there's a section here at the bottom that is more red and extends out further, right? So this is going to be the vertically polarized part of the signal that is underneath here, that is keeping it
the whole signal is vertically polarized.
Like that keeps it propagating. So this is how, like, irrespective of globe or flat Earth, this is how you get something to propagate horizontally over distance. So this, when he goes on to make this distinction about this bottom lobe being the vertically polarized ray and how we never differentiate between the two. Okay. Thanks for the clarification on that.
Yes, you're welcome for the clarification. Why is that a clarification important? Why is it important? This shows you what propagation method it's using. This one doesn't.
That's great. This is not model dependent, right? This is how it would work either way, because you still need that signal, because we're only starting at, 100 meters off the ground of the radar system, with respect to whatever the elevation would be too. So this is how you would do it.
Am I being overly pedantic here? Because every time I hear radar, I want to throw something on my screen.
Either way, there's no mutual exclusivity here, but I wanted to go back on this because this is an interesting technical point on the vertical polar aspect of it. This does not allow for like he was saying, like, okay, if it gets clipped out at the bottom, right? Well, I wouldn't even argue that it would get clipped at the bottom, or in the middle. I would argue that the whole thing wouldn't make it over. like more than over half of it, which would make it completely useless. But with that said, the only way to make this work to preserve the beam geometry and make it still so you can adjust it after it's been overcoming Earth curvature from diffraction, then you would have to have it follow a tangent to the horizon to do that.
Okay, so obviously we're not going over the grazing ray and the ground wave propagation and things like that. But the important thing about this is going to be this would not be necessary on a flat Earth. On a flat Earth, you would have this signal, right? It might reflect off the ground and stuff like that. But in the essence, you could actually point it upwards a little bit to be at the height that you need, and you wouldn't need to go right across the ground at horizon level. But because they go at horizon level, you get a unique propagation method called a grazing ray, which is part of a ground wave propagation. VHF typically is very difficult to do ground wave propagation with. Well, I'll come back to this. Let's see where else he goes with this, because at least he went back to this slide. Thanks, Alan. I appreciate you going back and making the distinction.
That would be the only way. That's why those specific claims are made in the way that they are, because we are trying to keep the system useful to how it was actually used as a line of sight system, not more or less line of sight. But here we'll come to the end now and get to the conclusions where MC Toon shows up to add some additional commentary.
Subs. Or memberships, my bad. Jeep and Reefer, Carl Christensen, Christoph. Gifted memberships. Thank you.
Oh, I'm at the wrong.
Hey, what's up, Toon? How you doing?
Hey, all right, I'm live, and I got to get you.
Okay, he has Toon here for Rage Bait. Let me skip ahead to, I guess they have some kind of refute here, and let's see what they have.
And published by Eckersley.
You came across in my presentation that you watched 6 times and know all about and know how it isn't analogous to what's being put forward.
Algorithm that we use to correct, which was actually first postulated and published by Eckersley of all people, about having to
in the 30s.
Right, exactly, to account.
Oh, no way. You mean the Eckersley stuff that I referenced in my presentation that you watched 6 times and know all about and know how it isn't analogous to what's being put forward at all? So let me get this straight, my dude. When you were watching this Prezi right here, you were watching old Battle of the Beams. You came across Eckersley's work that's referenced and given to everyone, and the whole story about how he withdrew his calculations because they're not analogous and they don't work on a globe for line of sight radio wave propagation to guide a plane.
Yes, and what you used was the omnidirectional broadcast one. What I used when talking about refraction was this paper by Eckersley. This paper, which talks about 10-meter waves and everything else and the different ways of refraction and diffraction, is available if you go look for it. This waves, in fact, here, hold on, let's just go to this. This talks about the propagation and, oh, by the way, it's also a spherical Earth. This talks about ultra short waves. So we're talking about VHF range during the 1930s. So this was originally from 1935, final was 1936. It talks about the refraction and what's used for it and things like that. So we're talking about field intensity. We're talking about the different theories and how they're expanded upon by other people and stuff like that. This is shown various different experiments on this. This has nothing to do with omnidirectional AM radio or broadcast or something like this. This has to do with directional waves and also omnidirectional waves, but specifically directional waves and how the field intensity is able to go over the curvature of the Earth. Because when you have an optical line of sight and a radio horizon, this is where we start deriving from our 4/3 R. And we also talk about the various different land, different conductivity that affects different aspects of it, and things like this. So this is the paper I was referring to. This is not the paper that you have posted on your website. It's very different between the two.
Like that guy you talking about Eckersley?
You mean the guy who withdrew that specific proposed mechanism later?
Yes, he withdrew his 1.5 gigahertz theoretical calculations because A, He did not want to basically put his reputation on the line for war doctrine. Basically what it comes down to. He says they were all theoretical, but it was enough to convince Linderman, who was a professor of physics. It was enough to convince Churchill through Linderman. And while Eckersley pulled it back, it was somewhat of a same sort of reference to a VHF signal being transmitted from hearts, but it was a much higher. It's actually a UHF signal. And it was still theoretically able to be detected over the UK at 20,000 feet. He pulled that back. What his motivations? Who knows? But it was unpublished, but it was merely theoretical. But it was given to him by a radio operator, so that means it was quantifiably easy to find within the radio environment that this was there.
After realizing how retarded it was? Is
You're
that the same guy?
You're talking about world-renowned Eckersley, who worked with Marconi on his famous radio wave propagation across the Atlantic, and then went on to do a bunch of other cool stuff that was just cited here, and actually revoked his calculations that he gave to Jones because he valued his professional career and didn't want to be the laughingstock of everyone.
No, he was worried about his professional career. He didn't want to be the laughingstock. He didn't want to be accountable for war doctrine is what it comes out to be. What if he was wrong in his theory? That's basically what it comes down to. That's just basically simple cover your ass.
Yeah, like, dude, when things are on the line, when it really matters, when radio waves are coming to stake, who are you going to call? Eckersley. Everybody knows that.
Yeah. Oh, you're talking about Eckersley, a man whose calculations aren't public and we don't even know what he proposed. Guys, here's the thing. With all we have from the R.V. Jones story and all the other stories, all the other books that cover this historical narrative, all deliver the same story about how Jones met up with Eckersley and was like, hey, bro, I need some calculations to explain how this could work on a globe. And otherwise, no one's going to listen to me because they already tried to come up with a way to do this. And they determined that it wouldn't even work on a globe. So they didn't even try it. So they're not even going to hear me out. And Eckersley was like, all right, dude, I got you. Hold on, let me get this napkin out. And he just writes out whatever equations. They don't say, oh yeah, and then he accounted for refraction, and that was, or then with enough diffract, nope, nothing. Or if we polarize, no, nothing. Nothing was proposed. Nothing was given. No calculations are provided. And when I questioned one of the authors, Tim Whipple, who wrote one of the books that cover this historical narrative about the calculations, he actually started by saying that he had seen these secret calculations, and he had a picture of them, and he was going to go get it for me. And then when I asked him for it again, he was like, oh, you know what? Actually, I might have been thinking of a different calculation and defer to this. So he linked me to some thing from the British National Archive historical thing that cost about $45 to print the page. And you're not even guaranteed that the thing you're requesting is going to anyway, that wasn't what we were looking for. And then he goes on to say, oh, you know what? It's actually just refraction.
Okay. So one, Todd Whipple is an author. He isn't an engineer. He's a science editor for the for the Times in London, and he's very smart, very brilliant. I've actually talked to one of his instructors, and said that he was, a prodigy of sorts of being able to understand scientific, theories very quickly and be able to communicate them in such a way that they are easy to understand. No, so when we talk about what Eckersley provided, this is what Eckersley provided. This is what actually comes down to. Raleigh Scott Farney, here's his call sign as a radio operator, was then a signals officer in RAF intelligence, showed Jones a report by T.L. Eckersley, in which Eckersley had computed the possible range of a 20-centimeter transmitter sited in the Harz Mountains. If the calculations were correct, the signals would bend around the Earth and might well be heard by a bomber 20,000 feet over England. This wasn't Eckersley going to Jones and saying, here, let me give you a napkin and let me give you some, some sort of thing, some calculations that are meaningless just to make myself look good. And I'm going to retract these later to make you look like a fool. No, these are basically, it was an unpublished paper that was done by T.L. Eckersley for a specific application. And this is a specific application. Now, have I been able to locate this? No, like I said, it's been unpublished. But I also reached out to Tom Whipple and asked him. Haven't received a reply yet. I'm curious to see if I can find this. I've asked some other people too to see if they can find this in any various ways. I'm curious to see where it is. It does not mean that it does not exist. It does not mean that it is fake. It does not mean that it didn't have any application whatsoever. This tells you right here what the application was specifically for.
So No one's had any idea of the proposed mechanism for this ever. And that man wrote an entire book about it. And he has no idea what the official claim is because there isn't one. Because once you attach numbers to these things, you end up with these ridiculous kindergarten drawings, as was shown earlier. You end up with this scenario that's untenable for a globe. And that's really all that I have to say to end on this, because what was put forward here was very subpar in terms of refutation, in terms of information and technical detail and cool history stuff. 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10.
Thank
in
you,
terms of
Alan.
providing physical mechanism to explain any of this or
It's not
give
physical.
math to it and be better than what McKeegan's video was, 0 out of 10. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns
Okay.
about Battle of the...
I don't really care about this question and answer session. Here's what I'm going to do. We are going to talk a little bit about what was actually going on. And one of the things that I definitely want to bring up is going to be a slide that I'm not sure if he showed or not, but I purposely want to go over. And that is, if I were to re-engineer, oh my God, come on, Windows, thank you. I think my mouse battery is dying. If I wanted to re-engineer this today, and I wanted to basically set this up today, and that's basically what they're asking me to do. They're basically asking me to re-engineer an 80-year-old radio navigation beacon with very limited source documentation, using frequencies I have no access to in a standardization, using an antenna that the FCC would throw me in jail for erecting. And you want me to re-engineer this based on the development of a system that took an entire country 2 years full of scientists and engineers to develop and deploy. And you want me to do this on my own and give you all the math behind it and everything else. Let me help you, because this was part of the presentation that you missed. If I were to engineer Nicobine today, I would have to consult no less than 8 different documents, part of the ITU. Now, the ITU is International Telecommunications Union. These are basically work groups that are based in scientists and engineers working together to better use radio wave frequencies and technologies. This is what all of us in the field, including fiber optics, satellite communications, things like this, we use ITU recommendations because that is the international standard that we all try to abide by. If I were to engineer this today, I'd have to consult 8 different documents. And some of these documents are 60, 70 pages with complex math. I'll even show you one of them. So the one thing that he missed that I want to go over actually, and the second thing is going to be part of this, is going to be this document right here. It's going to be this picture. Again, we're talking about, let me go full screen so maybe it makes it a little bigger. All right, let's make it full screen here. Look at this. What we're looking at right here is this is the part I want to show you. So I'm going to show you the grazing array, which can, obviously it's not the scale, goes all the way around and everything else. Here's a grazing array that's optical. There's a grazing array with radio. Now, why is there a difference between optical and radio? Wavelength. Okay, so with that being the case, this is what I want to talk about, is the grazing array. So with this in mind, what we're going to, I guess to kind of talk about when you're going to do a grazing array is you're pointing your transmitter directly at the horizon. And what you're hoping to get is a reflection that comes off of it. Now, before you can even contemplate this, you have to contemplate a bunch of different variables. So first thing you have to do is you have to take in Earth's curvature as a diffraction obstacle. Then you have to take into the Higgins-Fresnel principle. Then you also have to take in specific diffraction. You have to take in ground wave components. And there's different parts of the ground wave components. You also have to take into different things of the atmosphere and humidity and temperature and things like this. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about like the refractive index of the atmosphere. It's what we call the vertical gradient. We're talking about the absorption of the signal by the atmospheric gases. We're talking about weather conditions, rain, fog, other weather phenomenon that induces additional attenuation. And then when we talk about ground characteristics, we're talking about things like conductivity. There's a whole chapter based on the different conductivities of things like seawater, freshwater, ground that's hilly, ground that's farmland, ground that is bare, barren like desert, and in every variable in between that. It's like it's got various different measurements assigned to that you do for the math part of it. The other thing you're going to have is the terrain roughness. You also have to again count for earth curvature. Now, the other parts of this is you're going to have a very powerful transmitter. Kinnicabine had 3,000 watts transmitter. It's huge. The antenna characteristics, antenna gain, the radiation pattern, the polarization, all these things that that have to be addressed before you can even worry about shooting this at the horizon. Also, the receiver sensitivity. So basically, to engineer this for 30 megahertz for a distance of, say, 450 kilometers is a huge challenge. And you have to take in so many different variables and how it goes into it. Again, I'd have to use eight different recommendations to look at this, to go through this, to basically engineer this and do all the math and everything else like that. And I make a point saying we use software to do this now, because some of the actual integral equations that are used, in fact, let me pull that up next. Hold on, let me see here. Okay. So when we talk about ground wave and surface wave, it's ground wave propagation and stuff like that. So Summerfield in 1909 is the first one who started talking about kind of like this work for application for engineers for radio wave propagation. And then it's been expanded upon different times by Norton, Vanderpool, Bremer, and as you can see here, it's highlighted. They had a set of papers made it possible to calculate the field strengths at distant points. It's what we call a point-to-area convergence. We're able to measure what the signal strength should be based on like a link budget. We know what the transmitter is. We know what the antenna gain is. We know how the propagation is going to work. And we've already established that whether it's going over salt water, it's 5,000 times more conductive than average earth ground. So we're talking about the fact that it's there's not a lot of attenuation going over the ocean. And then it gets turned into like in a whole equation. Now the funny thing is like this equation, it purposely says that they allow for arbitrary changes of the Earth's constants and shape. And this is in the form of an integral equation, which for all intents and purposes is impossible to solve manually. Here's some of the variables when they talk about ground. They talk about how much foliage is on a tree. They talk about whether or not there's snow on the ground, how much snow is on the ground, whether or not in this case, the English Channel was frozen and was ice. They talk about hills. They talk about whether or not the land is farmland or not farmland, if it's trees or not trees, if it's rural or urban. All these different variables goes into it. And when you talk about a span of 450 kilometers, all that has to be taken into effect. And there's various different parts of that where they take, a certain part of it, and like the beginning part of it is more pronounced than the end part of it as far as the effect is how it affects the signal as a whole. But generally speaking, is that in 1986, this engineer, Domenico, basically provided a computer model, and it's called GR Wave, and you can get it through ITU. It's expensive. I don't have access to it anymore. It's expensive. But there's other online programs that you can do this with that actually make it very easy. And I'll even use them because I don't want to be used of showing you just a screenshot of a cartoon drawing. I'll actually use them. And it talks about a smooth spherical Earth with mixed path ground wave model. So, again, and then when we talk about, there's also atmospherics that affect a ground wave. So the importance of the atmosphere, at least in the first, say, 10 kilometers of the atmosphere, matters to ground wave. It affects how ground wave propagates across. We're talking about things like humidity and temperature and inversion layers and ducting and super refraction and super things like this that go on in the radio world. And again, based on an ITU. So, you want to talk about the difference in mass? This is all from the ground wave handbook. You want to go through and do all the math and everything else. You have a ground refracted wave, direct wave, how different things are affected. So we talk about VHF and higher bands and things like this. Like, you know, I don't necessarily want to, you know, go through the handbook and do a reading. It's if someone else wants to do that, by all means, go ahead. But there's a couple of parts that I want to highlight. So radio coverage predictions are almost invariably made in terms of electric field strengths. Okay, so just because I say ground wave propagation and I do the math for ground wave propagation, it doesn't mean anything unless I know what the signal strength is going to be on the end. I need to know what the signal strength is on the end in relation to the sensitivity of the receiver to know whether or not I have a good signal, whether or not I can make that signal work. And when you talk about cluttered environments, which contains vertical conductors, okay, every RF signal that uses ground wave is going to be vertically have a vertical polarization. That's specifically because it minimizes the what's the word I'm looking for? The drift of the signal as it diffracts. When something diffracts, it diffracts in the same general same general. It causes like a scatter, and it's in most of the signal. Let's say 90%, 80% of the signal is in the same direction it was originated from, and then comes the other 20%. It could be spread off in various different degrees and stuff like that. But however, the signal strength is now lower. It doesn't affect that other signal going across. When we talk about here's some of the things that we're talking about. Just some of them. We're talking about the conductivity of C, good ground, poor ground. And good ground and poor ground also has other variations with this, with different numbers and stuff like that. It goes into an obscene amount of variables that you have to account for, which is why that problem is impossible to solve manually. So if we're doing ground wave, right? And the idea is that if we're doing ground wave, we have to you're pushing the limits at the length of this. Like I said before, it wasn't just about the accuracy. It was about how many times they bombed it. If they only bombed it 6 times, that means that there are certain atmospherics in place for them to use it. Otherwise, they should have bombed it a hell of a lot more times. That's simple math. If it's always available, why didn't they bomb it more than once? Or 6 times, more than 6 times? Why didn't they continually bomb it if it was always available? It was the highest target. It was deemed necessary. London, which didn't necessarily have engine works and things like that, was bombed however many times? 5,000 times, 15,000 times. So you have to maximize your signal strength. You do that with a transmitter. You do that with antenna gain. You do that with antenna height. You also do it with the size of the antenna. You minimize your losses by doing ground conductivity. We use seawater in this case. You minimize the atmospheric losses, in which case you're trying to propagate across using ground waves. So you're trying to keep it low by using that grazing ray. You're talking about specialized techniques like wave tilting, which is basically you tilt the ground wave towards the horizon to help reduce the ground losses. So you're like skimming the surface. So that way the reflection of the ground actually doesn't detract from the signal. It actually adds to the signal and continues along at the same strength. You still have to account for Earth's curvature. You still have to account for fading. It takes careful planning. It takes expert calculations, and it's a high cost to do this. Now, this is a time of war. Cost doesn't matter. But, there's all this stuff has to be accounted for. So just to go say, I want to do ground wave, I have to account for this. Now to do grazing ray, I have to account for this. Now I also have to account for the antenna design, the transmitter, the receiver, and things like that. All these different things you have to account for. And that's just to even engineer this. So if we're going to, when we talk about, trying to find my other notes here real quick is, so there's different, there's different mathematical models. They're in this handbook. If someone wants to look at, I'm not going to do all the math because, to be honest, someone's just going to say, nah, and it's not worth me spending a year of my life re-engineering something that's 80 years old. What I will do, though, is I will use some of the software that we have. Now, remember I said radio signal was the most important part? So let's do a link budget. I built in this Cleve, and I built in this Marble Hall. I put the antenna height at 6,000. I put the antenna height at 91 meters. So it's 84 to the height. I went to the center of the antenna, added 8, just to get it off a little bit off the ground. Frequency is 31.5 megahertz. I just picked the middle one between 30 and 33. Transmit power is 3,000 watts. The transmit line loss, I'm sorry if you guys can't read this. I didn't even consider that. Let me go in a little bit here and move this over away from my head. So they use low loss cabling. I put in about a half a dB. It could be as much as 1 dB. I'm trying to use variations of this. There is no actual measurements available in the source documents that allows us to account for this. Antenna gain, based on the properties of the antenna and the fact that it was a dual stack, there was a front and back stack to a dual vertical array, which acted as a reflector. And by that rainbow drawing that talked about the way that the signal is being transmitted, it's in line with some of the other antennas that we used when I was in the military. So and those range from 15 to 25 to 30 dB of gain. I added 20. It's a middling number, more or less. That's here. The receive antenna gain, it was a trailing wire out of the HE111. The trailing wire is basically, it's on a winch. They let it out. It goes out to a specific length because of the frequency that they're looking for. So it has an antenna gain of 2. Receive loss within the airplane, I put in 0.5. So the receive threshold of the receiver. Now, a military receiver is actually between 1 and 2 microvolts. I added to 5 because that's what the Helicaster was that was being used by the Anson aircraft. If I were to use the Telefunken receiver, it would be 1, 2. I could easily make this 2. But let's use the Helicrafter one because this is kind of like one of the things that were part of this debunk. And I put in the required reliability of 95%. Let's submit this. Oh, shit. Okay, well, now I timed out. So too much talking, not enough worky. 31.5, 3,000 watts. Let's make this 1. Antenna gain we said was 20, not 520, said 20. Receive antenna gain was 2. Loss was 0.5. Receiver threshold we said was 5. And let's make it, what did I say, 95% reliability, and submit. I think requires 2 different, oh shit, sorry. Okay, let's try this again. Here's how the signal would travel through this. Some of it would go through the earth, some of it goes over the earth and things like that. So what matters is this part. Here's the Latin longs if somebody wants to check to make sure I entered them right. Here's the ground elevation. Here's the azimuth. So 3,000 watts transfers into 65 dB, approximately 65 dB of transmit power. So we have loss, we have loss, we have loss, we have loss. Receiver sensitivity is neg 93, which was actually even better. And then we have loss saying, here's the free space loss for the distance. Here's the obstruction loss. This would be any obstructions on the way. This could be trees, hills, cliffs of Dover, whatever. Forest loss, urban loss, and the statistical loss. And the statistical loss is basically based on the 5% difference between 100% of reliability and 95% reliability, or from 95% reliability to 0. So they include it's like an overhead of that. So here we go. Distance is 500 kilometers. The precision is within 264 meters-ish. This isn't, by the way, when it talks about the precision, it's not the distance. They're talking about the distance here, not the distance of the width of the signal, because none of that is actually included in this calculation. We does not talk about things like the beam width and stuff like that. So all the way through that, we have a fade margin of basically 25.5 dB, which means it's more than acceptable to have radio signal at that point, and it would work. And that would have been their better case of saying, not because it's a flat earth, because the signal would never have got there. Well, now we prove that the signal gets there and how it gets there. So now the other question is going to be, Well, how does it propagate? And how do we get there for that? So we have Cleve here as our transmit sites. We have Marble Hall as our receive lights. By the way, this is Voice of America VOA cap. Forget what VOA cap stands for. Not important. It's a common RF website. It's Voice of America coverage something or another. So we have our Latin longs of our transmit and receive sites here. Red's transmit, blue is receive. We went ahead and, so the noise level, you can use remote, you can use quiet, you can use industrial. I went ahead and used rural. It's somewhere in the middle because it is pretty rural out there and you're not going over London and stuff like that. I just did a, minimum takeoff angle. I could actually set that to 0.1. We can do auto. I'm using 10 meters, which is it's the highest level I can use in this thing, which is basically the difference between 28.2 megahertz and 31 megahertz is minimal. And I'm going to say it's for the month of, let's say August of last year. Okay. Because August was when one of the bombings were from Derby. So now I'm going to say, what's the reliability map? Let's go here. So what we have is this is a map showing what the reliability is with this takeoff angle and things like this. So this shows us, 90 to 100 is the bright red, 90, 80, 70, 60, all the way down. So this blue line right here, or this white line right here, this is the Alps. So anything you see past that would be skywave propagation. This would be skywave propagation. This is bouncing off the ionosphere to go further on and to go further to get these different, this is what we call DXing and stuff like that. But if you notice, there is no gaps here between Derby and Cleve. So Cleve is sitting right around here. Derby is sitting right around here at this point. So best case, we're talking about 80% reliability. Worst case, we're talking about 70% reliability. This is using the calculations of a spherical Earth. This is using ground wave propagation because you notice there's no gaps that goes through here. And if you're bouncing off the ionosphere, it would be going way up here. This is how it works. This shows radio wave, ground wave propagation between these two. This shows what we just showed, what the signal strength is. We just showed how the signal would act and what the reliability would be. Reliability of 70% does not mean it was available 100% of the time for a year. Welcome to Globe Earth. So, use the software. We talked about, any number of different things as far as, what they missed, what they overlooked and things like that. When you talk about grazing ray, you talk about radio wave propagation. There are so many variables that you have to go into. That's why we use the software. I showed using the software. I showed using a link budget. I've shown how we got to those points, and I've shown the handbook from the ITU that is required for me to basically engineer this. And I showed all the different ITU requirements that are required that they omitted from their little presentation just now in their reply. They don't even address the fact that you need these to engineer this. They just said, nah, it doesn't work. I don't know what more we can do. This shows it works. This shows how it works. This shows that it was an engineering feat at the time that is still being used today and studied today. Here's the funny thing. Grazing ray propagation, that ground wave propagation, it's used in military communications and over-the-horizon radar. Why is it used over the horizon radar? Well, because it follows over the horizon. This way you still get your reflection back, and you can use that to at least identify incoming targets before you can get fine-tuned to a higher frequency in being able to get range and everything else. You can at least see incoming targets coming in, and you can now divert your fighter group towards that location. We use that today in the military. The other thing we use it for is military communications. The reason why you use grazing ray military communications whenever possible, using high frequencies, is to get the extended range, but also to eliminate the fact that it could be intercepted. Even though we encode it, even though there has a signal on it, even though it's buried in in cryptographic signaling and stuff like that, it doesn't change the fact that someone can still intercept it. By grazing ray, we have a control over right across the horizon using a directional antenna to make sure that it's going where we want it to go. This is used every day. This is things I have experience in. So you can take someone like me who has 25 years experience in telecommunications, military experience using this exact same technology in such a way that was proven in combat zones. I'll show you my DD-214 that shows where I went to school, how long I was in, and what schooling I went to. Or you can do your own research and look up all those ITUs yourself, in which case I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Or you can listen to a flat earther who read a few things, misunderstands things, says things one way, then counteracts them, contradicts them another way right afterwards, and just says it doesn't work without any proof. Doesn't say anything else like why diffraction wouldn't work. Doesn't even talk about the different radio wave propagations. Doesn't talk about the different antenna properties that goes into it. Doesn't talk about anything except optical line of sight and how it was available for a year every day, and it was when it wasn't, when it was bombed 6 times. I don't know what to tell you. Yes. Monkey cat pat pat. To quote Nathan Thompson, thank you for playing. You got nothing. It doesn't prove anything. One thing that they failed to mention, and maybe it's later on in the presentation, I don't really want to go that far into it. To be honest, I'm tired of listening to it. One thing I would like to know. If the world is flat, why is there a direct relation to distance, to altitude, to the lower available audible limit? Why does this not go straight across the ground like your picture depicts it, your diagram depicts it? This is the case. We should have never had RAF should have never been able to put the planes up. They could have just looked right across the ground and said, it's here. But it's not. Why not? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go back. Let me go back to this. Sorry. Didn't realize I wasn't sharing. So in this graph, why does it go up? Why is there a distance? Why is there a relationship between distance on the bottom and height on top? It matters. And it more than matters than just a little bit. You don't address this. If this was flat Earth, this would be ground level all the way across. And we know it's not because this is a Luftwaffe document. So you can address the fact that there's so much more engineering into this than goes into it. You can address the fact that there's an altitude problem that you have to abide by as far as the testing of the signals. But you didn't even go into all the slides on those. But look, I don't blame you. Some of those ones they're not necessarily, I mean, they're relative to the topic at hand, but maybe, you don't want to go over them before your audience, or maybe you don't deem them as important or whatever, but the whole thing is important. So I don't know what to tell you. So with that being said, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. If there's questions in the peanut gallery, I'm happy to take them. I want to thank all you kiddos for joining the school, for coming to class and enjoying it. I hope I was able to answer some of the questions and totally enjoy this watch party with me. I'm glad we did not turn into a drinking game. Oof. But no, all things considered, I think look, I appreciate the comments and the fact that he was impressed with some of the things that I read and that he learned something. I'm thankful for that. I'm glad he was able to do something and take something from it. But let's not go with your confirmation bias. Learn the entire thing, not just part of it. Don't just dismiss things like, oh, well, you talk about Eckersley went to Jones and said here, and then he retracted. That's not what happened. If you're going to describe what happened, be truthful about it. Be specific. You want to talk about maintaining the coherency and the geometry of the signal? Be specific about the signal. I'm telling you that the signal is going to be 2.8 kilometers wide in one direction and 3.2 kilometers wide the other direction for 10 square kilometers target area. You say accuracy doesn't matter, but the problem is you're looking at accuracy as a single point. You're not looking at it as how it relates to why it was only bombed 6 times. So let's move on from there. So CK and everybody else, I grant Emma, Monkey, Pat, I see Spin. I saw Swallow poke his head in here. I know this subject bores the shit out of him. Hey, you know, I appreciate you guys all being here for my first live stream. Thank you very much for helping me launch Unfornicated. I'm going to be doing some more live streams across the board. For those who were asking, we have we have a pet here that that'll maybe make a another cameo appearance soon. Who knows? But I want to thank also DP Debunks and the Drunk Debunk Show and all you others out there who pushed me to actually do this and put it together. So thank you all. And if you guys got any questions or whatnot, we can do that. We can hang out some more. Is anybody else streaming that we can go, raid and cause shenanigans, or we can cause shenanigans here? I don't care. I just like to say thank you guys for listening. You're right, Monkey Pat. It's why and how. Give me the specifics. Because, again, I'm not going to do a year's worth of engineering for this thing and show you all the math when I just showed you the ITUs that you can find the math and do it yourself. I'm not doing it. It's a year of my life I won't get back. So, some of the things we have coming up. Let's see. Well, more sarcasm. You can be guaranteed of that. That's that's going to happen regardless. Probably some more rum. I still have my bottle of 12-year-old Appleton rum, so that's that needs to be drunk. We're going to go into things like the difference between skepticism and streamers, or I'm sorry, conspiracy theorists, and how to tell them apart. We're going to we'll just debunk things that come up. For those who are unaware of Witzett's radio claims, there's a couple other ones that he does. He talks about VHF distance records, but obviously he doesn't understand that topic either. I was thinking about addressing that. I was going to address the moon landings and how amateur radio operators were able to listen in on the satellite. On the astronaut communications. In fact, I actually have access to the reporter who reported on it in Louisville, Kentucky, who was the first person to listen in. Not affiliated with any sort of government back in on Apollo 11. There's additional radio amateurs who were able to listen to further ones that were based in Long Island. But I've talked to the reporter. I'm going to have him, maybe not for a live stream, but maybe have a Zoom call that I'll record and be able to put up here. So if you have questions that you want to ask the reporter about listening in on Apollo 11 from Louisville, Kentucky, when it was filmed in Hollywood or Houston or wherever, shoot them over. I'm happy to do that. Let's see, VHF, I'll probably do one on that. Skip zones, that's another fun one about Ace High Network and tropospheric scattering. I might do something along those lines as well. But I don't want to just focus solely on radio, even though that's basically, a lot of my background with satellites and radios and fiber optics. But that's not to say that we can't bring other people on to talk about other things. I know a CERN physicist who's Italian named Franco, who's always happy to learn. I learned something incredibly interesting from him about how the moon affects the Earth crust measurably. So think of it as a magma tide. So there's all sorts of things I have in line. So if there's a specific conspiracy you want to, or misinformation you want me to address, the email is in the About page. Otherwise, you leave me with my own devices, and I got to come up with my own shenanigans. So, but yeah, let's keep it going. So I know DP Debunks is going to be online soon, if he's not already. So I will see you guys over there. And let's, because I love Sonos so much, and because they were nice enough to write some songs for Unfornicated, I would like to go out on one of their songs real quick. They were nice to write for me, because I know I don't have that skill, nor can I play any goddamn instruments. But hey, might as well use something else. So what we'll do is, again, thank you guys all. It's been my pleasure as always, and I will see you guys soon.
Scrolling feeds of endless dread, truth and lies fight in my head, echoes of a war unsaid. I'll stand strong, won't be misled, won't be misled. Bots and trolls with red pill lies, whisper secrets in disguise. I'll see through their hollow cries, cut the strings, I'm breaking ties. Ooh, unfornicated, won't be played. Their twisted games, I ain't afraid. Oh, I'll shine light on their charade. In this battle, truth won't fade. Masked clowns spread their twisted tales, selling ghosts in endless trails. In the end, their story fails. I'll break free and lift the veils. Through the noise, I'll carve my path. Won't be swayed by hollow wrath. In my truth, I'll take a bath. Unfornicated clears the aftermath. Unfornicated, won't be played. Their twisted games, I ain't afraid. I'll shine light on their charade. In this battle, truth won't fade. Through the noise, I'll carve my path. Won't be swayed by hollow wrath. In my truth, I'll take a bath. Unfornicated clears the aftermath. Unfornicated, won't be played. Won't be played. Their twisted games, I ain't afraid. I'll shine light on their charade. In this battle, truth won't fade.
All right, everybody, thank you again, and we are out of here.